The Alpha burned for my song. A Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Rain Hart. Chapter 1. The Auction for Silence. The Moonvale Hall shimmered beneath a lattice of moonstone chandeliers, the glow refracted in veins of silk smoked glass that trembled with each shifting breath of the gathered alphas. They sat in tiers like wolves in watch, gold-threaded robes coiled at their feet, eyes gleaming with anticipation, some fevered, others calculating. All of them hungry. At the center of the polished onyx stage stood the reason they had come. She was draped in translucent silver, her veil the color of frost-bitten lilies, her wrists tethered delicately to the pedestal behind her, not in cruelty, but in ritual. The posture of the offered. Cerynthia Hellwind, the silent song. The silver-throated echo. The girl who had never once sung. Not because she could not, but because they never allowed her to. The hall was soundless. No hammers, no heralds. Only the pulsing hush of restrained power. The silence was reverence, also hunger. Every alpha present could feel her, even without her voice. The promise of her song was a narcotic, humming just beneath the skin. High Priestess Elath stood to the side, the folds of her ceremonial robes pulled like clouds around her sandaled feet. Her voice cut through the stillness, clear and sharp, every word edged with sacred restraint. 10 years we have waited. The Silver One has been tended. She has not spoken. Not even in sleep. The vow is unbroken. Cerynthia kept her chin down, the way she'd been trained. Her veil brushed her lips, a phantom weight where song had never been allowed to bloom. She focused on her breathing. In, out. In, out. Her ankles ached, pressed in place by the ceremonial footprints that dug gently into the stage, meant to remind her that an echo's steps did not belong to herself. A ripple moved through the room as the bidding began, not with shouts or coins, but with flashes of soulmark rings, dreamstone tokens, and military pledges. A Southern Alpha offered 7 legions. An Eastern Alpha raised with the promise of a Dreambound treaty. Then came the emissary. He stepped forward like dusk trailing smoke. A lean figure swathed in chain crimson, face half covered by a mask of coiled iron links. His voice was measured, every syllable dipped in venomous civility. The crimson chain offers a different price, he said, gaze locked on Elath, though his attention prowled toward Cerynthia like a tongue of flame. Peace. Withdrawal of our siege from your southern borders. 10 winters of silence from the Blood Hills, if the girl is given to High Alpha Saraveth. A murmur broke across the hall. Not outrage. Calculation. Peace. That word had weight. Cerynthia's stomach turned. She did not move, but inside her mind a wind began to shriek. 10 years she had trained for this. She had been told her silence was purity. Her voice, once released, would not belong to her, but to the one who won her. And now she would be a weapon traded for silence. Except... The hall shook. No, not shook. It trembled. A low, guttural resonance swept from above, like thunder rolled through bone. Cerynthia lifted her head instinctively. From the highest loft, the one meant for absent royals, came a sound no one expected. Boots. Steps. He did not wait for permission. He did not ask. He simply appeared, an outline of shadow in wolf pelt and iron-gray armor, eyes glinting with the dull gleam of restrained wrath. Eryndor Rave March, King of the North. His gaze swept across the hall with such contempt it felt like a brand. Then, without preamble, he raised one arm, and from the sleeve, something glimmered in the air before falling. A single thong. Not ivory. Not bone. A king's thong, carved from the spine of his own lineage, soaked in his howl. It landed with a clean clink on the pedestal before Cerynthia. The hall froze. This auction is over, he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. High Priestess Elath stiffened. Your Majesty. She is mine. His eyes pinned the crimson emissary. By right of dominion. By dreamline. And by bloodline sovereignty. The emissary tilted his head. She has not sung for you. You have no bond. I do not need her song to hear the echo. Eryndor's gaze shifted to Cerynthia. Finally. Directly. She is the howl that answers mine. Not your bargaining chip. Cerynthia could not breathe. She had been braced for a blade, a chain, a cell. But not this. Not choice. Not a man who looked at her as if she were more than a vessel. As if he'd already heard her voice, without needing her to sing. She trembled. The ache in her ankles burned. Her chest hurt with something fierce and hollow. Something inside her wanted to run. Something deeper whispered, "Don't you dare." The emissary stepped forward. "This is a declaration of refusal." Eryndor's voice dropped into something colder. "It's a warning. You deny Cerynthia his request. I deny him everything." Silence again. Not reverent this time. Violent. The emissary bowed with stiff mockery. "Then let it be known. You've not merely stolen a song. You've stolen the casus belli." He turned to leave, but paused as he passed the platform, leaning close enough for only Cerynthia to hear. "You think you've been chosen," he murmured, breath metallic and warm. "But you're not a song. You're the match. And he's just given us the reason to burn everything." He left without waiting for response. High Priestess Ilath gestured to the ceremonial guards, who slowly approached to unpin Cerynthia's ankles. Her body felt numb, floating. She didn't look up again until she felt a hand, warm, calloused, close around her wrist. Eryndor. No vow. No words. Just a tether of flesh and heat, anchoring her. She should have pulled away. Should have demanded to know why he had claimed her. But she didn't. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if the silence inside her was still fear. Or the prelude to song. Chapter 2. The Girl Who Wasn't Allowed to Sing. The silence hall was colder than she expected. Not in temperature, it was warm, almost unnaturally so, the air thick with dried lavender and the faint sweetness of preserved mou pear, but in presence. Cold in the way temples often were. Still, too still. The kind of stillness that pressed against the skin until your breath felt like blasphemy. Cerynthia sat at the center of the circular chamber, knees folded beneath the sweep of her robes, wrists resting loosely in her lap. She hadn't been shackled, not like during the auction, but the walls themselves felt like a cage. Pale stone etched with lines of lulled binding runes. A single bowl of water at her side. No mirrors. No reflections. No voice. A vow room. A room designed not to hold the body, but the soul. Every hour, a bell chimed somewhere above, and a shadow flickered at the narrow slit of a doorway. An attendant checking she hadn't spoken. A priest marking the length of her silence. Cerynthia had kept quiet for 10 years. And yet now, silence felt heavier than ever. Because now it wasn't about devotion. Now, it was punishment. She closed her eyes. The soundless hum of the walls began to vibrate in her bones, barely perceptible, but steady. A tuning pitch, resonating from the tower's dream spire. The North's way of keeping their gifted quiet. A way of keeping her controlled. They feared her voice. And worse, they feared that he might let her use it. She lay back against the woven furs placed beneath her, gaze fixed on the curve of the ceiling. Sleep came reluctantly these nights, too many thoughts crawling in her blood like insects. But when it did come, it was never gentle. In her dreams, she saw him. Eryndor. The first night, he had stood with his back to her. Wolf pelt half slipped from one shoulder, blood streaming down his ribs in ink-dark rivulets. He hadn't moved. The second night he turned. Eyes like clouded frost. A mouth set in rage, then in quiet, too quiet. He spoke, but no sound came. Only his lips moved. Her name, perhaps. By the third night, he knelt beside her, his hand rising toward her face. When he touched her cheek, her dream skin flared like it was lit from within. And he said, "Don't open your mouth." She had woken up gasping. And aching. Not just between her legs, though the phantom heat of his body lingered like smoke. No, the ache was in her chest, in her throat, in her hands, which had curled into fists without her realizing. She wanted. She didn't know what she wanted. She wasn't supposed to want. It was the fifth night when he came in reality. She didn't hear the door open, of course not. It was built not to make noise, but the shadow that fell across her was unmistakable. Heavy. Rooted. A presence that curled instinctively against her skin, made her throat tighten and her hands go still. She didn't rise. Didn't look. She just knew. "Your guards told me you haven't eaten," said Eryndor. His voice was low, rougher than she remembered from the hall, but unmistakable. And tired. He sounded tired. Like battle weighed on his tongue even here. Cerynthia didn't move. Eryndor crossed the room, the faint sound of his boots softened by the fur. When he stood in front of her, she finally looked up. He wore no armor. Only a dark tunic, sleeves rolled to his elbows, jaw dusted with the shadow of a day unshaved. His hair was half-tied, as though he'd come from war and forgotten to finish the braid. His eyes landed on hers. And something shifted. Like two notes finally caught in perfect harmony. Like bone against bone in a song only wolves understood. Cerynthia parted her lips, and the pressure in the room changed. Eryndor inhaled sharply. "No." His voice wasn't angry. It was afraid. She froze. "No sound," he said again, stepping closer. "You open your mouth, and the whole damn tower will hear it." She lowered her eyes. It was the first time in her life someone had told her not to speak, and it hurt. He knelt slowly, until he was at eye level. She could see the scar along his left brow, the fleck of gold in his right iris. He looked at her like she was both the arrow and the wound. "I'm not the first to silence you," he said. "But I might be the last." Her lips trembled. "You're not the first to command me," she whispered. His breath caught. She raised her eyes. "But you're the only one I don't want to disobey." The moment shattered. A deep, low clang echoed through the tower. 1, then 2, then 3. Far above them, the ancient bone clock, silent for generations, let out 3 consecutive chimes. The stone beneath them groaned. Eryndor's pupils dilated. He looked up, then back to her. "You triggered the bone chimes. I only spoke your name." That was enough. The door slammed open. Alpha Valak stood there, breath heaving, armor half-fitted, sword drawn. "My king, are you harmed?" Eryndor didn't move. "No," he said. "Not harmed." Valak's gaze snapped to Cerynthia. He flinched, just slightly, as though the sight of her had physical weight. She triggered it, didn't she?" Eryndor rose. "Leave us." "My lord, the council." "Leave us." The door shut again. Cerynthia stared at the king, still kneeling, unsure whether to rise or retreat. He stepped back. She expected him to order her silence again, to turn his back, to say nothing and vanish the way all men had before. But he didn't. He said, quietly, "If you must speak again, do it in my dream. Not here." And then he was gone. The silence left behind wasn't peace. It was the shape of his voice, still echoing between her ribs. Chapter 3: The War That Sang Too Loud. Blood had soaked into the snow. Not fresh blood, it was too dark for that. Blackened, curdled, clinging in coagulated pools around boot prints that led nowhere. The scent rose in waves as the wind swept over South Fong Watch, sharp with iron, salt, and something more ancient. Dreamburn. Eryndor stood in the center of the outer yard, motionless as the sky bruised toward dusk. Around him, the air was thick with silence, not the wary hush of men on the edge of war, but the eerie, hollow absence that only followed slaughter. Dozens of his men were dead. Not by blade. Not by claw. By their own hands. A soldier had strangled himself with his own wolf-hide belt. Another had jumped from the Dreamspire parapet, arms outstretched as if to fly. One had simply torn at his own throat until nothing was left but wet ribbons. Valak stood at his king's right, jaw clenched tight. His armor was bloodied, though none of it was his. "They didn't scream," he said, voice low. Not one. Eryndor didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on the tower's blackened rim, where the dream bell had cracked mid-chime. That bell was never supposed to break. It started in their sleep, Valak continued. First the twitching, then the teeth, then silence. Until it wasn't. Eryndor's voice came like a winter tide. And the dreams. Valak hesitated. We checked their bedrolls. All of them had bite marks on their tongues. All were sweating. Some had clawed at their faces. They were fighting something in their heads. But no wounds from outside. Chainbound tactics, Eryndor said grimly. They've weaponized the dream line. Valak swore under his breath. Then it's worse than we thought. It wasn't just a military threat. It was spiritual contamination. An attack on the very thing that made them wolves, the shared dream lattice of alpha instinct, memory, and bond. That which tethered them to one another in sleep. And someone had twisted it. Eryndor stepped through the yard, careful not to touch the bodies. The snow crunched beneath his boots, wet and soft, melting too quickly. As if the dead carried heat even now. Bring me the one that survived, he ordered. Valak nodded once and turned. A moment later, a soldier was dragged before him. Young, pale, trembling. His eyes were blown wide with fear, veins dark beneath the skin. The wolf mark on his collarbone had faded to ash gray, barely visible. The boy kept muttering under his breath. A melody. Just fragments. She sang, but it wasn't her, it wasn't her. Eryndor knelt before him. Who sang? He asked quietly. The boy looked up, tears streaking down his filth-smeared cheeks. She did. But her mouth was wrong. Her voice was hers, but her face wasn't. She said she would save us, but when we followed... He bit down on his tongue hard enough to bleed. Eryndor caught his jaw before he could do it again, pressing his thumb beneath the boy's throat where the faded mark pulsed faintly. Breathe. A shudder. Then a whisper. Chains, around her throat, like a crown. The soldier collapsed. Eryndor straightened, fury coiling in his spine like a second skeleton. Cerynthia has them singing Cerynthia's voice, he said. He's fed it into his army. But how? Valak asked, aghast. She's never sung in public. Never been recorded. Eryndor's jaw locked. She sang once. Valak's face paled. To you. Eryndor didn't respond. Because in the depths of his dreams, she had whispered his name. And that single whisper had been enough to unravel every bone clock in the palace. Now it was being used against them. Mount the northern wall, he ordered. If they attack again, I want no one left sleeping. He paused. No one. Night fell hard and fast. The kind of night that didn't offer stars. Only frost, mist, and the low pulse of approaching war. And then, just past midnight, the air began to sing. It was faint at first. Almost sweet. Like a lullaby half forgotten. But to Eryndor's trained ear, it was wrong. Too symmetrical. Too controlled. Too clean. It wasn't a song born of pain or instinct or memory. It was a manufactured weapon. The enemy's voice crept through the dream lattice like rot through a root system. He could feel it in his bones. In his blood. His men began to twitch in their armor, some moaning, others gripping their heads. One collapsed, foaming at the mouth. Another stood and walked blindly toward the edge of the parapet. Wake up! Eryndor roared, his voice laced with alpha command. This is not your mate. This is not your dream. But the melody only grew louder. And beneath it, he could hear it, the echo of her voice. Her tone. Not her. He dropped to one knee, fingers digging into the frozen stone, blood blooming beneath his nails. And still the voice poured in. Cerynthia. No. Not her. Just a ghost. Just a lie. The dreamscape folded around him, no longer stone, but fog, then smoke, then nothing. He was on the battlefield and not. Alone and not. The world twisted. And in that formless dark, he saw her. Silver-veiled. Barefoot. Pale as frost. She reached for him. "Eryndor," she whispered. His breath caught. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I never left." Her fingers brushed his cheek, and suddenly it was not her hand, but a shackle. Not her veil, but chains. Not her voice, but Cerynthia mockery playing through her throat. He roared, the sound splitting the dream in two. "You don't get to use her." The voice faltered. And in the split second of silence, another sound rose. A song. Real. Soft. Shaking. Hers. Not the stolen melody, not the twisted lullaby. Her voice, threadbare but true, whispering through the cracks in the dream. "I'm still here. Follow my voice." He did. He found the core of the dream, black, pulsing, poisonous, and burned through it. Using his own mark. His own blood. He carved a rune through the fog with his fingers, cut down to the bone, and roared his soul into it. The dream shattered. Eryndor woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, blood staining his right arm from elbow to palm. But the soldiers around him, those who hadn't jumped, hadn't torn themselves apart, were alive. Unmarked. Breathing. Valak rushed to his side. "How?" "She saved us," Eryndor growled, struggling to his feet. "Cerynthia." He nodded once. And then, with fury he hadn't let himself feel since his father's death, he turned toward the south. "I'll kill Cerynthia with my own hands," he said, voice low. "But first, I'm going to take back her voice." Chapter 4. The Mark She Didn't Want. The high sanctum of bone had never been quiet. Even in stillness, it carried echoes, scratches of memory etched into the marrow of the walls, the pulse of generations of Alpha Kings, oaths bled into stone. But tonight, it was different. The hush was not reverent. It was the silence of wolves baring teeth behind closed lips. Cerynthia stood at the center of the chamber, her bare feet pressed to the smooth bone slab dais, the silver circlet of the accused braided into her hair. She wore no veil this time. Only a pale gown that shimmered faintly when she breathed, what little she allowed herself to. They were here to mark her. Or to rid themselves of her. The room was ringed with Alpha Elders, counselors in midnight robes, and warriors who stood too still to be trusted. At their front, seated upon the tri-banded dais, were the three triarchs of the Bone Assembly. And just behind them, slightly apart from them all, stood the Moon Priestess Eryndor, robes the color of snowfall, expression carved from judgment. Eryndor stood across the chamber, flanked by Alpha Valak. His arms were folded, his face unreadable. But Cerynthia could feel the fury beneath his stillness like a blade tucked into a sheath. "Silver echoes Cerynthia Hallwind," intoned Eryndor, voice solemn, echoing. "It is the will of this court that your song be sealed." Cerynthia's eyes remained fixed on the floor. "You were not meant to wake the bone clock. You were not meant to cross into shared dreaming without permission. Your voice, untethered, unbonded, poses risk to the mental lattice of the kingdom's defense." Another priest stepped forward with a bowl of ink and a blade shaped like a crescent moon. "The mark will be given with your consent," Eryndor said. "Do you yield to transfer? Will you bond willingly to Lord Caliph of the Eastern House, who has been chosen to contain the residual harmonic imbalance?" Cerynthia looked up and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a yielding one. "I do," she said, voice soft, clear, the first word she'd spoken aloud in days. Eryndor's head snapped up. Across the chamber, murmurs rose like wildfire. He moved a step forward, but Valak placed a hand on his shoulder. "Wait." Eryndor's voice was low. "I don't want to wait." But Cerynthia was already lifting her arms, allowing the ceremonial sleeves to fall away. Her collarbone gleamed, bared for the carving. A priest stepped forward with the sigil plate. Another held the inked blade, the contract scroll rolled and waiting. She knelt. And at that moment, something in Eryndor's chest cracked, not rage, but something more terrible. A fracture of trust. Of being too late. Of not knowing if she'd ever truly been his. He took a step forward. She looked back. And then she moved. Her fingers slipped beneath the waist of her gown, where a small seam had been torn open earlier. From it, she drew a sliver of crystal glass, honed fine as a whisper. The priest closest to her didn't notice until she turned the blade against herself. Not at her wrist. At her throat. The room gasped. Eryndor screamed. Eryndor lunged. But blood was already blooming. Not deep enough to kill. Just enough to ruin. The ink blade clattered to the ground as Cerynthia sliced along the edge of her collarbone, through the ceremonial ridge where the sigil would have been cut. Her blood hissed against the inked seal, corrupting it instantly, melting the contract scroll in the priest's hands before it could be sealed. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed forward. Eryndor shouted for intervention. Valak held Eryndor back with both arms as the king snarled, eyes wild. Cerynthia swayed on her knees, her hand still clutching the bloodied shard. And then, just before she collapsed, she looked at Eryndor. Her eyes were clearer than they'd ever been. "You want my voice," she whispered, lips stained red, "but you won't carry the war that comes with it." She fell. And for a moment, the world held its breath. Eryndor broke free of Valak's grasp and rushed forward, catching her before her head hit the stone. She was still breathing. Barely. The blood on her skin traced down his fingers like ink. He lifted her into his arms, cradling her like something more than a symbol, more than a war crime or political burden. Just a woman. One who had chosen pain to keep him from further ruin. When Eryndor approached, hands outstretched to take her back, Eryndor snarled. The sound silenced the entire chamber. "Step back," he said. "She must be isolated," the priestess insisted. "I said step back." One of the counselors tried to object. Eryndor turned to him. "If any of you touch her," he said, "you will be marked as enemy of the crown. You will be struck from your line. You will burn on your own bone pyres." His voice was not loud. It was worse. It was calm. He stood slowly, holding Cerynthia's limp body, and walked to the ceremonial altar. There, in front of everyone, he smashed the sigil plate. The crack echoed through the sanctum like thunder. "She belongs to no one but herself," he said. "And if she chooses me, then it will be of her will, not yours." No one stopped him as he left the chamber, blood trailing behind him like an unspoken promise. That night, the kingdom didn't sleep. No decrees were passed. No voices dared rise. Only the distant toll of the bone clock, still unsettled from her defiance. And Eryndor, king, warlord, wolf, sat at the top of the throne's stairs with her in his arms, unmoving, as healers whispered and fussed. He didn't speak. He didn't sleep. He just listened. To her breath. To the faint, broken hum that escaped her lips even in unconsciousness. A song with no words. But he knew the tune. He always had. Chapter 5: The Wolf Who Refused to Share. The North Vale Throne Hall had never felt this full. Not during coronations. Not during war tribunals. Not even the year the First Bone Treaty was signed beneath its spires. But today it brimmed with wolves, alpha lords in battle cloak and bloodright, courtiers adorned in ceremonial thong, priests in pale robes and carved silence. And Eryndor, seated on the bone-carved throne alone. The high wolves stood in a crescent, their marks glowing faintly under layered leathers and bone chain mail, not one of them sitting. Because none of them, not even those once loyal, would sit as long as the council stood in judgment. "Too many decisions have been made without us," said Counselor Dareth, voice pitched like diplomacy and laced with threat. "War deployments, Dreamcraft prioritizations, security of the southern towers, all channeled solely through your will, my king." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. "You think I've forgotten how to rule?" Eryndor asked, voice quiet. "No," Dareth bowed slightly. "We think you've begun ruling only for her." The air shifted. No one dared look toward Cerynthia, who stood to the side beneath a pillar wrapped in moonroot. Her hands were folded. Her head bowed. She wore ink-colored robes now, no longer silver, robes meant for those kept close to kings, but never officially named. Ink did not gleam. Ink absorbed light. And words. She has no title, Eryndor said. She speaks no decrees. She holds no weapon. She holds you, came a voice from the crowd. Enough. Eryndor rose. Even without armor, he looked like war. His hair half-tied, sleeves rolled past his elbows, the lines of old battles visible at the collar of his tunic. When he moved, people stepped back. Wolves remembered what it felt like to hear him howl first. You want power? He asked. No one answered. You want a voice in war? He pressed. Then let's howl for it. A hush fell. Counselor Dareth hesitated. You would trial it? In arena? I will face any 3 who think they can command better, Eryndor said. You forget, this throne was earned, not inherited. The Iron Brand arena roared before noon. The walls shook with stomping boots, with the thrum of challenge, of ritual blood. The sacred ground, scorched by decades of dominance fights, shimmered faintly with protective sigils. Alphas gathered in rows, no weapons, no armor. Only strength and the pride that demanded it be tested. Eryndor stood in the center, bare-chested, barefoot, his right hand wrapped in bloodcloth. The first challenger was broad, faster than expected, a southern alpha with crimson dream lines flaring across his knuckles. He went for the jaw. He didn't land a single blow. The second tried cunning, distraction, misdirection, a feint followed by a low sweep. Eryndor stepped over him like fog stepping over flame and dropped him with a single backhand. The third didn't even finish shifting. Fear took him before the final howl began. When it was over, Eryndor stood bloodied but unbroken. His voice carried above the crowd. I don't share my throne with men who forget what it took to carve it. Applause erupted. Reluctant. Scattered. Then rising. But he didn't stay. He didn't revel. He left the ring in silence, dream marks pulsing faintly, and walked into the cool dark of the silent antechamber behind the arena. Cerynthia wasn't there. She'd vanished before the third challenger fell. He didn't panic, he wasn't that kind of man, but his pace quickened, and by the time he reached the upper walkways above the hall of glass echoes, his fingers were twitching with unease. Then he heard voices. Low. Valak's steady and calm. And hers. Soft. Apologetic. He stepped into the doorway without warning. Cerynthia stood too close to Valak, by protocol, not intimacy. Her hands were folded, but her head was lifted. She was saying something about easing tension and not making him fight alone. Eryndor's blood went ice cold. Valak saw him first and stepped back sharply. Cerynthia turned and paled. Eryndor didn't speak. Not with words. He walked toward her, closing the space between them like a storm rolling over snow. When he reached her, he didn't shout. He didn't snarl. He simply reached out and grabbed her wrist. Not cruelly, but not gently either. You went to him, he said. She stiffened. It wasn't. You went to him, asking for help to protect me? I thought. What? His voice dropped. That I couldn't handle a room of cowards? No, her eyes didn't flinch. That maybe you didn't have to. He stared at her. And that was worse than fury. You want me to be softer, he said, voice low and hot. To sit in council. To share my hell with those who've never once bled for this kingdom. I want you to stop bleeding for everything, she replied, voice rising now. You act like you're the blade. But I see it, I see what it's costing you. And maybe if you let someone else stole the edge, you'd ask him. Eryndor snapped. You'd kneel to him to keep me from cutting myself too deep? I didn't kneel. But you didn't come to me. That stopped her. The silence between them hummed like a wire pulled too tight. Eryndor released her wrist. His fingers lingered for a moment longer than they should have. Then dropped. I would slit 1,000 throats for you, he said softly. But you can't even lower your head once for me. She stepped back. Slowly. You didn't ask for that. I shouldn't have to. He turned before she could answer. He left the chamber without looking back. She didn't follow. Not then. That night, the southern wind shifted. Scrolls arrived at the palace gates, sealed with bone wax and ash. The crimson chains mark stamped deep into each, a new declaration. A doctrine. The voice severance mandate. Effective immediately, Cerynthia declared, the girl Cerynthia Hellwind is hereby named false inked. A fabricated bond. An unauthorized echo. A symbol of northern contamination. In exchange for her extradition, the war would halt. The Blood Hills would go quiet. The siege would end. She would be silence again. Eryndor read the scrolls in his war room alone. He crushed them into ash. And he did not speak her name. But that night, Cerynthia found him sitting at the steps of the broken bone throne, one hand limp against the marble, the other curled near his mouth as if trying to hold in the sound of something that refused to stay quiet. A howl. Not of rage, but of hurt. She didn't speak. She only sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, letting their silence braid into something that wasn't quite forgiveness. But wasn't distance either. Chapter 6, The Blood-Soaked Choir. South Vale Ridge burned red beneath a moonless sky. Eryndor stood ankle-deep in blood-soaked soil, the ground slick beneath his boots, the air writhing with smoke and scream song. Wolves howled and tore into one another, pack against pack, brother against brother, as though the moon had been poisoned and madness bled down with the stars. They weren't fighting the enemy. They were fighting themselves. The lock song had begun 2 hours ago. Now, Dreams Under Field was a graveyard of howls. The Bone Flame Scouts were the first to fall. Alphas hardened by war, oaths sworn to Eryndor's banner, all gone feral with crimson-flecked eyes. One had torn the throat from his own second in command, then turned his teeth on himself before anyone could stop him. Eryndor had shouted for order. For Dreamguard wards. For the sigil seers to weave their silence nets. None of it worked. The music was inside them. Inside him. It wasn't a melody. It was a pulse, low and guttural, weaving through marrow and memory, dragging up instincts meant for battle, but warping them into slaughter. And worst of all, he recognized the tone. It was her voice. Not truly hers. But twisted. Warped. Fed through Cerynthia's lock song chorus and spat back as something tainted. It wasn't that the voice sounded like her. It felt like her. Enough to confuse even him. Hold the line. Eryndor bellowed across the ridge, sword dripping, shoulders heaving. They are not enemies. Wake them, don't kill unless you must. But it was too late for most. The field was an orchestra of death now, and his wolves were the chorus. He turned in time to see Captain Rhyst, loyal to the bone, snap another soldier's spine with his bare hands, foam streaked across his mouth, pupils blown wide with frenzy. Rhyst, Eryndor shouted. The captain turned, eyes flickering. Just long enough for Eryndor to see the moment of recognition. And just long enough to see it die. Then Rhyst lunged. Eryndor didn't hesitate. He drove his blade through the man's chest. It wasn't clean. Rhyst's arms still moved, trying to crush him even as the sword impaled him. Blood gushed between their armor. When the captain finally fell, Eryndor was left holding a dying man who had once sworn never to turn. The blood was hot on his skin. The rage was hotter. From the ridge below, another lock song wave rolled over the battlefield, stronger this time. Harmonized. The kind of chord that clawed at the bones, that twisted the gut with unearned guilt. His wolves screamed in response. Fall back. Eryndor ordered, barely audible over the growing cacophony. To the second ridge. We regroup under sigil fire now. But his voice cracked halfway through the command. The lock song had started to seep into his mind now. He felt it, like wires under his skin, tugging memories, scraping open old wounds. He stumbled. Dropped to one knee. The snow beneath him steamed red. He clenched his jaw, trying to push it out, to ground himself in the pain, in the real. But the song was relentless, unspooling deeper with every breath. The battlefield blurred. And then, like mist breaking, he heard it. Another voice. Soft. Not among the discordant choir. Not part of the lock song. Real. Warm. And only for him. Eryndor. He knew that voice. This isn't your fault. He tried to shake it off. No, no, get out. Not like this. In his mind's eye, she appeared. Cerynthia. Silver-veiled. Moonlit. Kneeling beside him, her hand hovering just short of his chest, not touching. Not yet. A figment. A dream. But hers. This isn't your fault, she whispered again. His voice cracked into a snarl. Don't you dare. She blinked. He reached up, grabbed the image of her by the wrist. His hand passed through like mist, but it still felt like contact. I told you to stay out of my dreams, he growled. You were dying, she said simply. Then let me die. At least not in your arms. Not with you tearing your own mind apart just to save mine. She leaned in. Don't flatter yourself. I'm here because you bleed louder than anyone I've ever heard. He would have laughed. But the lock song surged again, harder now, trying to drown her out. She flinched. And then she did something reckless. She leaned in further and sang. Only a note. One piercing, golden thread of sound that split the lock song's discord in two. Eryndor felt it like lightning through his skull. The pain was exquisite. His blood surged. His wolf snarled. And the dream burst outward in a ring of broken harmony. The corrupted melody shattered. When he opened his eyes, the ridge was silent. Smoke drifted from ruined tents. The dead were still. The surviving wolves lay panting, dazed, bloody, but no longer feral. The lock song was gone. He looked up, still kneeling, breathing ragged, and found her again. Not in spirit. In flesh. Cerynthia stood on the ridge, barefoot, cloak flapping in the winter wind, hands still faintly glowing with dream resonance. You shouldn't be here, he said hoarsely. She didn't move. You have no armor, he said. She nodded. No escort. Another nod. You could have died. Finally, she replied, voice quiet, so could you. His fists curled into the earth. You used your voice. On a battlefield. Unbonded. You risked every dream seal from here to the capital shattering. I know. You don't get to decide when to die for me. She walked toward him. Slow. Measured. Stopping just out of reach. Neither do you. He stood, swaying slightly, blood dripping from his side. He looked at her like a man starved, like if he touched her, he'd come undone. She saw it. She reached anyway. Her palm brushed his cheek. Warm. Alive. I'm not your weapon, she said. But I will fight with you. He grabbed her wrist, firm, not brutal. You sing for me, Cerynthia. Not them. Not this war. Me. She smiled, soft and wry. Then maybe you shouldn't make me want to save everyone. He exhaled like he'd been holding it for hours. Then, quieter, more broken, I can't lose you. You haven't. Yet? Far down the ridge, among the enemy dead, one body twitched. A soldier, throat torn, eyes blank, lifted his head just once. And sang. Not a melody. Just a line. Spoken through a voice box barely intact, lips torn but deliberate. She belongs to the Chain King. Not you. Then he collapsed. For good. Eryndor stared. The rage that followed was pure. But it didn't scream. It simmered. And that night, while his men buried the dead and reinforced the dream wards, Eryndor stood watch over the snow-stained ridge with his sword in one hand and Cerynthia's echo still ringing in his bones. Chapter 7. The Alpha Who Feared Her Voice. The Bonewater Shrine smelled of moss and old grief. It sat carved into the cliffside where the mountain bled into the valley, built long before kings, long before dream binding, long before wolves had learned to tame their instincts into law. Even now, the air held memory. Echoes pressed into the walls like secrets no one had ever dared speak aloud. And now, they had come to silence a song before it could finish writing itself. Eryndor stood with his arms crossed, watching as High Priestess Elath prepared the ritual stones. Her white robes brushed the silver basin, her movements practiced and unshaking. She didn't look at him. Not directly. She didn't need to. Everyone in the sanctum knew what this was. Not purification. Not control. It was fear. Cerynthia stood at the center of the circle, barefoot, her shoulders bare beneath a thin veil of moon-dyed cloth. The top of her robe was loosened, exposing the smooth slope of her collarbones, unmarked, vulnerable, too beautiful to be bound. And yet she was here. Not under duress. By choice. To silence herself. The silence between them wasn't sacred. It was sick. "You're certain," Elath asked, her voice soft, careful, "that this is your will?" Cerynthia nodded. Her eyes never left Eryndor's. The priestess moved aside. "Then the mark is ready." Eryndor didn't step forward. He couldn't. His feet wouldn't move, and his throat locked on the words he should have said before they ever reached this place. Cerynthia stepped toward the shrine stone. Its surface shimmered faintly, carved with a circle of runes meant to dampen dream resonance. Once pressed to flesh, it would bind through blood, sealing the vocal strand, muting all shared dreaming through her tone. A sacred vow made of silence, carved with the cost of everything she was. She reached for the stone. "Stop." Eryndor's voice wasn't loud, but it cracked through the air like a whip. She froze. Her hand hovered just inches from the surface. "Let me do it," he said. "If this must be done, if your voice must be sealed, then it won't be you who breaks yourself." Her gaze met his, slow and steady. Then she took a step back, lifted her hand, and pressed 2 fingers to her own clavicle. With her other hand, she reached down, lifted the shrine stone, and without flinching, pressed it into her skin. The hiss of burning rune against flesh echoed like a scream that wasn't allowed to be voiced. She didn't flinch, but her eyes filled. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks as the sigil seared a crimson mark into the hollow between her bones. The glow dimmed. The room fell still. And then, her lips parted. No sound came. Nothing. Not even breath. She tried once. Twice. Still nothing. She had made herself a ghost. And he had let her. Eryndor walked toward her. Each step was heavier than the last, his breath burning in his chest, his rage turned inward like a sword left sheathed too long. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He just looked. At the mark. At her mouth. At the sheen of wet along her lashes. And then, finally, at her eyes. They were not afraid. They were asking. Not for comfort, but for honesty. "You're afraid of me," she mouthed. He didn't answer. Her hand brushed her throat, then pointed at him. "You fear this," she mouthed again. "You fear me." His voice was hoarse. "Low. Not you." He swallowed. "I fear that if you ever truly sang for me, I wouldn't stop until the world was ash." She blinked. "I fear that if I heard all of you, if I truly listened, I would give up everything I've sworn to protect. My kingdom. My crown. My life. For a song." Her chest rose and fell in silence. Tears kept sliding. But she didn't step back. She reached up, placed her hand gently on his heart. It beat fast beneath her fingers. Out of rhythm. Unsteady. She closed her eyes. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I didn't want to silence you," he whispered. "I just didn't know how to keep you safe. From them. From Saraveth. From me." Her lips brushed his. Soundless. But soft. Forgiving. Until her fingers slid down his chest, stopping over his ribs. And there, even with the mark freshly scorched between them, she hummed. Not aloud. Not real. But he felt it. In his blood. His wolf rose instantly, aching to answer. He gripped her waist too tightly, breath catching as the ghost of her melody wrapped around him, not in air, but in scent, in memory, in the way her body leaned into his, like she still trusted him more than she feared what he might become. He kissed her. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't kind. It was desperate, a war cry made of lips and teeth and regret. His hands clutched at her as if she'd vanished the moment he let go, as if the silence she had gifted him was a noose around both their throats. She gasped, but again no sound. Only breath. Only heat. Only the scent of burning ink and moonroot as the shrine bore witness. He dragged his mouth to her throat, to the edge of the mark, and stopped there. His breath trembled. "Say something," he whispered. "Even if I'm the only one who hears it. Just once." She pulled him closer, held his head against her chest, and let him listen to the only thing left. Her heartbeat. He stayed like that a long time, listening, wishing it was enough. But outside, the world did not pause. By dawn, Cerynthia message had reached the northern watchposts. A public declaration. Words sung by his captured Boneflame priests and broadcast through the southern dreamlines. Cerynthia Hellwind, the silver voice, has broken the balance. Her existence is war. Return her to us, or we will rip every echo from your dreams until no alpha dares sleep again. The silence she had given them would not save them. But it had already damned her. Chapter 8. The Betrayal That Wasn't. They discovered she was gone just past midnight. The dream lattice rippled first, small tremors through the sleeping minds of those most attuned. A cough here. A startle there. Then a shriek. By the time the third bone clock chimed, the palace was in chaos. Northvale's dreamscape had fractured like glass, all coherent threads fraying at once. Alpha Valak burst into the war chamber with his tunic still half-fastened, face white with something between panic and disbelief. "She's gone," he said. Eryndor didn't speak at first. He stood by the central map table, fingers braced against the obsidian rim, body too still. Around him, the other alphas shouted orders, theories, accusations. The priestesses whispered curses. The counselors demanded blood. "She's fled," Counselor Tell insisted. "Took nothing with her. Left no word. She's a breach in the spine." The moment she sang, she planned this. "She didn't sing," Eryndor said, quietly. "She did something. The systems don't unravel like this unless someone wants them to." The word betrayal drifted through the room like fog. Someone made the mistake of saying it aloud. Eryndor turned, and the entire chamber froze. "No one," he said, voice low and thunder dark, "calls her that. Not while I breathe." "But she didn't run." Tell sneered. "Then where is she?" Eryndor didn't answer. He already knew. Because while the others had scrambled for reports, for signatures, for signals in the dream code, he had done something else. He had gone to sleep. Voluntarily. Without sigil. Without tether. And in that liminal space between wake and dream, he'd seen her. Not the Cerynthia who stood quiet beneath palace archways. Not the one who pressed her silence like a gift against his chest. But her, chained to a spire of bone, mouth bound in silver, eyes fever bright from venom. Enemy Dreamlock Tower. South Ridge. Cerynthea's mark on every wall. It hadn't been a message. Not a vision. She had reached him. Just once. Just enough. Enough for him to find her. He left the palace without a word. No escort. No armor. Only a blade carved from the fang of the first Wolf King and a bone spike etched with dream blood, his own. The journey to Thornvale took half a day. Through frostwoods and dusk rivers, over ground too familiar to fear. The Whisper Light Inn stood just on the edge of the treeline, abandoned for years, now crawling with Cerynthea's sigil webs. He didn't knock. He burned through. The battle was vicious, but not long. They hadn't expected him. Why would they? No king would leave his capital to bleed for a girl already condemned. But Eryndor had never been a king who played by rules made by cowards. He found her inside the Tower of Dream Chains, suspended between sleep and pain. a collar of silver etched with nightmare runes around her throat, body half limp from the venom coursing her bloodstream. When he touched her, she didn't wake. But her body shifted toward his like it remembered him even when her mind could not. He broke the collar. With his teeth. He didn't know what words she'd lost inside that tower. He didn't care. He lifted her into his arms, blades still slick with enemy blood, and carved their way out of the dream prison with nothing but steel and rage. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, dawn had begun to crawl across the ridgeline. Cerynthia stirred. Her eyes fluttered. Her lips parted, then twisted as a sharp spasm ran down her spine. Easy, he breathed, pulling her closer. She was burning. Feverish. Her body jolting with flashes of raw energy, dream spike residue. It would kill her if it ruptured her mark. If she triggered an unbound howl mid-sickness, she could tear through the dream lattice like fire through oil. Cerynthia, he whispered, shaking her gently. You have to hold it in. Her lips trembled. Then she mouthed it, I can't. He wrapped his arms around her, pressing her against his chest, anchoring her in warmth and scent and skin. If you sing, he said, voice cracking, the whole mountain will collapse. You'll take yourself with it. You'll take me with it. She clutched his tunic with shaking fingers. He held her tighter. You should have left me, he murmured. Let me be your grave, not your burden. Through a trembling breath, she mouthed something. He leaned closer. Her voice was barely there. I already left behind my voice. My dignity. My right to live like a person. Another breath. But I didn't leave you. That was all. She passed out against him. He held her for hours. Until the ridge was silent. Until the wind stopped howling. When he finally returned with her to Norvale, the city did not greet him. It judged him. The banners did not fly. The bells did not ring. Instead, the Bone Council convened without his command. And the verdict was swift. The Wolf King has lost his mind. Because no sane alpha would risk the entire kingdom for a girl with a mutiny branded across her back. Because no ruler would defy dream law, abandon his station, shed royal blood outside the gate, just to retrieve a traitor. But Eryndor didn't hear them. He was too busy at her side, wiping sweat from her skin, anchoring her pulse to his own with a palm pressed to her chest. Only once did he flinch. When she stirred, eyes still dazed with poison, and whispered, not with her voice, but through the trembling pull of his dream mark. My neck burns. He peeled back the bandages. And there it was. A second collar. Invisible to the eye but felt by every tether in the dream lattice. A lock seal. Cerynthea's brand. A bomb, wired into the deepest part of her shared dreaming. She wasn't just a danger now. She was a trigger. One breath from her could unravel the whole of Northvale's soul web. And she had no idea. Chapter 9. The Bone Throne Cracks. The high seat of bone had never been louder. Not in war. Not in famine. Not in the blood-wrought centuries when kings carved treaties with claws and teeth. But now it thundered with polished boots, with proclamations hurled like knives, with the metallic taste of betrayal sharp on every tongue. Eryndor stood at the base of the throne steps, his cloak undone, shoulders squared, crown unfastened and clutched in one hand like a weapon. Behind him, the bone throne loomed, empty, cracked at the base where it had weathered 100 oaths and one too many betrayals. Before him stood Counselor Dareth and the Alpha Elders, lined like wolves ready for slaughter. She is a liability, Dareth shouted over the swell of voices. She is infected. Marked. And you dragged her back from the heart of enemy territory with your blood on her and hers on your tongue. I did, Eryndor said calmly, because no one else had the spine to follow her into hell. She is a weapon, designed by Cerynthia, honed by silence, corrupted by song. She is a ticking howl, a fuse wrapped in silver skin. And now our enemies sing her name as if it were their banner. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. She belongs to no one but herself, Eryndor growled. And that is why they fear her. She is why we fear you, Dareth hissed. You've cast away counsel, defied protocol. You've bled for her, lied for her, risked every seal in the dream lattice just to keep her warm in your bed. Eryndor moved so fast the hall went breathless. 1 step. 2. And his hand slammed into Dareth's collar, slamming the counselor back against the bone column behind him. She is not your entertainment. She is not your scandal. And she is not yours to name. Dareth didn't fight back. He simply smiled. That's the first time you've touched someone with fury since she was taken. You haven't looked like a king in months, Eryndor. You look like a wolf in heat. The room bristled. A bone priest stepped forward, hand raised in ritual denial. The court demands a relinquishment of your command, the priest intoned. You may keep your title. You may sit the throne. But the Dreamguard, the watchtowers, the lunar fleet, they now answer to council consensus. Not you. No, Eryndor said. It is not a request. No, he repeated, louder now. You do not take what was earned in blood. You do not strip my command because I loved too fiercely. Dareth turned to the gathered wolves. Then we must ask for the offering that buys peace. And that's when the doors opened. Cerynthia walked in. No veil. No guards. No chains. Just silence. The kind that made everyone in the hall go still. She moved slowly, her silver-threaded gown whispering across the bone floor, her skin pale as milk beneath the dream light. Eryndor turned as she passed him, but she didn't stop. Not until she reached the moonbind platform at the center of the court. She knelt. The room gasped. She lifted her chin. And though her voice was gone, her words were clear, etched into the dream lattice itself, echoing softly through every alpha's bones. If my life buys peace, then take it. No, Eryndor said instantly. She didn't look at him. If the Dreamweb must be healed, then let me be its seal. If silence must be complete, let it be permanent. Stop, he said, already moving. If my death steadies his crown, then let the blade be swift. Eryndor reached her in 3 strides, dropping to his knees, wrapping his arms around her before she could finish the sentence. She didn't resist. She only collapsed into him, trembling with effort, with grief, with something deeper than sorrow, resignation. Tears streamed down her face, soundless. This is the only thing I have left to give, she mouthed. He cradled her head to his chest. She could feel his heartbeat. Fast. Unruly. Like the edge of a storm. You don't get to die, he said, voice shaking. Not for them. Not for me. She looked up at him, eyes red. This is what my life means, Eryndor. This is all it's ever meant. He pressed his mouth to her forehead. Gentle. Devastated. If you die, he whispered, I will howl until the sky rips in 2. Until gods fall deaf and wolves tear stars from heaven just to shut me up. The dream lattice shuddered with the force of it. The walls trembled. Cracks splintered through the base of the bone throne. The court recoiled. Dareth lifted a hand. He threatens collapse. I promise it, Eryndor snarled. He stood, lifting Cerynthia into his arms like she weighed nothing. She buried her face in his shoulder. Silent, but not invisible. He turned to the crowd, voice like steel dragged across stone. If she dies, I unseal the king's blood. I break the vow that holds this kingdom upright. I unmark the dream line. I shatter every throne ever carved from wolf bone. And I take the north with me into the grave. The silence was complete. Until someone whispered, he's not bluffing. Eryndor turned, walking out of the court with her still in his arms. No one dared stop him. Not even the priests. Not even the dreamseers. Not even the wolves who once would have died to keep him contained. Because a king willing to die is dangerous. But a king willing to break everything is worse. That night, 3 things happened. First, the Bone Council split, their unity fractured by fear, by guilt, by awe. Second, Cerynthia wept for the first time since her voice had been taken, Not because she was afraid, but because she no longer knew what she was allowed to want. And third, Cerynthia moved. 3 war banners unfurled beneath the southern stars. Lockchain regiments rose from dream fields drowned in bone. And Cerynthia himself, clad in crimson and silence, began the march north with one order whispered through the ranks like a sacred curse. Bring me the girl, and bury the king beneath his broken throne. Chapter 10. The Song That Burned His Skin. The spire was hidden from sight, shrouded in storm mist, wrapped in wards older than kingdoms. No map bore its name. No echo passed its threshold without trembling. It stood like a tooth buried in the world's skull, pulsing with half-sleep and peril. Only 2 beings in all the north dared enter it now. Eryndor lay at the center of the dream spire's bone chamber, chest bare, eyes closed, arms stretched outward as if offering himself to fire. Cerynthia knelt above him, fingers pressed to his temples, skin slick with sweat. She was shaking, not from fear, from restraint. She should have never allowed this to go so deep. The connection, the soul resonance, the shared dream bond, had surpassed what even the wildest blood songs of the ancients warned about. She could feel him in her bones now. Not his thoughts, those she could manage, but his ache. His hunger. His guilt. His rage. The way his soul curled around hers in the dream world like a dying beast begging not to be left behind. He didn't beg, of course. Not with words. But his touch? That begged. The first time they'd kissed in the dream lattice, she'd felt it, how tightly he held himself, how he'd rather die than take from her what hadn't been freely given. But this time she had kissed him. And he had answered. Not with patience, but with need. Her breath trembled as their connection deepened, the dream space shimmering into existence around them, a field of white ash and molten sky, where nothing lived but the truth. And the truth was this. They wanted. They burned. And neither had the power to stop anymore. She reached for him in the dream. Her hands slid along his shoulders, his neck, the planes of his chest. He pulled her close like she was air, and he was drowning. She climbed into his lap and whispered his name. There was no sound. But he heard it. His mouth found hers, desperate, and the collision was brutal in its sweetness. There was no gentleness now. Only fever. Only heat. Only the kind of touch born of too many nights spent on opposite sides of silence. Their bodies joined as the dream wake began. She felt it in the base of her spine, the snap of harmony fusing between them, no longer fragile, no longer stitched with fear. The soul marks on her ribs lit, his name carved into her skin in invisible ink that bled silver fire when he moved inside her. And he. Eryndor arched back, jaw clenched, a snarl escaping him as her body pulled the truth from his own mark. His name flared along her collarbone. Her name, hers, seared across his abdomen in characters that weren't even language, just meaning. The chamber trembled. Bones groaned. The air shimmered with silver heat. Then everything exploded. Not literally, but in the dream. The dream lane ruptured around them like glass under lightning. Back in the physical chamber, Cerynthia's body convulsed. Her eyes flew open, blood leaking from her nose, her ears, her mouth. Eryndor's eyes snapped open the next breath. And he screamed. His body arched off the altar stone, skin alight with a crawling shimmer. His chest, his arms, even the insides of his wrists burned, not with flame, but with marking. His veins lit with silver fire as her name wrote itself over every inch of him, not once but layered. He gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out again, even as the agony climbed. Cerynthia reached for him, barely conscious, her fingers trembling. Eryndor. She couldn't speak, but the bond carried it anyway. He turned his head and saw her. Blood at her lips. His name across her ribs. Their bond screaming through the dream lattice with the force of an untamed howl. The chamber door slammed open. Valak. He stormed in, sword drawn, eyes already scanning for enemies until he saw what lay before him. "What in the name of the Moonlords did you do?" He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Eryndor's arm. The Alpha flinched. Valak hissed, yanking back. "You're burning. Your blood is hot enough to blister steel." "That mark, what is that mark?" Eryndor didn't answer at first. He looked at Cerynthia. She lay limp, eyes half-lidded, the barest smile touching her lips despite the blood that still trickled down her chin. He could still feel her inside him. Not metaphorically. Not romantically. Literally. Like a second heart. A shadow of her pulse moving through his body, tracing every scar, lighting every vow. "She's marked you," Valak said grimly. Eryndor gave a slow nod. Valak's voice sharpened. "Is she worth it? Is she worth this?" "You're bleeding from your dreams, Eryndor." "I'm burning," Eryndor said. "You'll die." Eryndor finally looked up. His voice was raw silk and steel, shredded by pain and something softer. "She is what's left when I finish burning. She's the last light." Valak stared at him, then at her, then turned away. "Then the council was right," he muttered. "You've gone mad." "I was born mad," Eryndor said, leaning back on the stone. "I just didn't know what I was mad for until now." Cerynthia stirred. He turned toward her instantly, hand reaching to cup her cheek. She smiled. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her bloodied mouth. "Soft. Careful," he whispered into the bond. "I'm here." She mouthed back, "So am I." But the peace didn't last. An hour later, a bonehawk arrived from the southern watchtower, sealed in crimson wax. Cerynthea's sigil burned into the parchment like a brand. Eryndor broke it open. "Read the first line. Then read it again. If the girl is not surrendered, the next war will not stop at dreams. I will swallow the moonlight from your sky." He folded the message, walked out onto the balcony of the Dreams Pyre, skin still glowing faintly with her name. He looked up at the moon and whispered, "Let him try." Chapter 11. The Voice That Destroys Cities. The moonbind citadel sat in stillness, as if the stone itself were bracing to be betrayed. Cerynthia walked its silent halls like a ghost granted one last breath before vanishing. Her bare feet made no sound against the polished bone tiles, and the ceremonial silver veil they'd given her clung to her like morning fog, its weight not heavy, but cruelly final. At the end of the corridor, a door waited. Vault of Dream engraving. Beyond it, silence eternal. She paused only once, at the window carved into the tower's eastern face. Below, the city glowed soft with hearthlight. 5 dream towers shimmered in quiet alignment, pulsing with the breath of millions. Every alpha, every bound mark, every promise woven in moon-blooded ink. All connected by the lattice she could rupture, or restore, or ruin. The council's terms were clear: surrender her resonance, lock her within the vault's dream-steel confines, sever the bond to Eryndor, and in return, Cerynthia would halt his march. They called it peace, but it tasted like execution. Still, she had agreed. And yet, her steps did not carry her through the vault's threshold. Instead, as moonlight cast jagged shadows through the city below, Cerynthia turned from the door and descended the spiral staircase, down, past the consecrated chambers, the ink forges, the echo cells, until she reached the shrine where Eryndor had first whispered her name into dream. He was not there in flesh. But she didn't need his body. Not tonight. She knelt at the basin of dreamwater, where the lattice ran thinnest between minds, where breath and will alone could reach the soul of a man. Her fingers dipped into the surface. Silver ripples sang outward. And she sang. No sound echoed in the room. No words passed her lips. But in the marrow of the dream world, her voice broke through like a blade through fog. It found him, sleeping in the wreck of his war room, surrounded by half-burned scrolls, hands stained with ink and decision. His eyes snapped open in the dream. He stood in a ruined citadel of bone, dream-formed and half-lit by echo fire. And she stood there, waiting. She was barefoot again, the silver gown of old clinging to her like memory. Her hair undone, her mark glowing. "You're not here," he said, stunned. "They locked you down. The vault. I didn't go in." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, grasping her shoulders like she might vanish. "You'll die for this." She nodded. His jaw clenched. "Why?" Her gaze held his. "Because you never asked me to stay," she whispered, though her lips didn't move. He shook his head. "You didn't have to be asked. I needed to choose." He pulled her against him, pressing his forehead to hers. The bond sang louder than her voice. Hot, bright, fraying. She exhaled, voice trembling. "If you'd known I was a curse, would you have chosen another echo?" He didn't hesitate. "I'd let the curse swallow 1,000 cities," he said. "But no other soul will ever hear you sing and think it belongs to them." Her breath hitched. She kissed him in the dream. And he burned. She didn't stop the fire. Instead, she gave him one last gift. Her final melody. Not the notes of goodbye, but of unsealing. With her kiss, she poured resonance into the deepest part of his dream arc. Into the place he never let himself touch. The king's seal. The bone-bound core of him that held every command, every lineage vow, every controlled howl. And she broke it. He arched back with a roar, in the dream, in the body, in the world. The resonance shattered through the moon-bind lattice. Every bone tower cracked. The vault of dream engraving splintered. 5 of the kingdom's dream towers, once used to link the minds of alpha armies, collapsed. Their rune-sealed cores overloaded. Their anchors ripped from beneath the citadel. Cities woke screaming. Ingmark's blood silver. Priests wept as their seals trembled. And in the chamber where she had first offered her silence, Cerynthia collapsed, bleeding from the mouth. Eyes still open. The dream thread between her and Eryndor smoking. He was already running when the first tower fell. The guards tried to stop him. He broke one's arm without blinking. By the time he reached her, the stone beneath her was scorched. Her gown was shredded. Her lips still moved, forming the memory of the song. He dropped to his knees, cradled her to his chest. "Why?" he whispered, broken. Her eyes opened. Her voice was only in his mind. "Because you were too loyal to yourself to ask for help." He didn't weep. He howled. The Bone Council met within the hour. No vote was held. They stripped Eryndor of all Dream Command authority, declared him emotionally compromised, a threat to the unity of the Lattice, a king with no leash, a wolf with no moon. But they were too late, because in the stillness before dawn, as Cerynthia slept, barely breathing, her body raw with backlash, the dream sky ripped. Every bonded wolf in the north saw it. In every mind, a vision. Saraveth. Not in person, but as shadow and echo. A projection crafted of dream steel, laced through the fractured lattice like poison. His smile was wide, mocking. His voice reached millions. "You felt it, didn't you?" he whispered. "The girl you love. The voice you covet. She just taught me how to break your gods." The image of his army bloomed across the dream horizon, rows of crimson-chained wolves. Screaming, singing, smiling. "North Vale will fall," he said, to her tune. Then the vision blinked out. The moon dimmed. And the city exhaled, as if it already knew. They'd lost. Chapter 12, The Crown with No Followers. Wolfstone Hall had once been carved from the bones of titans, each column a monument, each step a vow. Now it was hollow. The great hall, where the Thorn Assembly gathered to declare war, crown kings, pass edicts of alliance and exile alike, stood empty. Dust hung in the shafts of dawnlight. The bone seats, 12 in all, carved from dreamstone and bloodwood, circled in the ancestral echo of Northvale's power, were vacant. Every single one. Eryndor stood at the center of the ring, still wearing the half-shattered crown that marked him Wolf King in name if not in system. The iron loops at his shoulders were unfastened. His cloak, red once, now hung scorched at the edges, half mourning, half wrath. He had summoned the kingdom. He had called for arms. He had offered alliance, vengeance, resistance. Not a soul had come. Except one. Alpha Valak leaned against the wall at the far end of the chamber, arms crossed, eyes steady. No ceremony. No oath book. No priest to bless their vow. Just one man with his sword strapped to his back and quiet loyalty carved into the lines of his jaw. No word from Frostreach? Eryndor asked without turning. No. Thornshore? Gone silent. Driftwood Bastion? They swore neutrality last night. Didn't even send a messenger. Eryndor laughed. A single, sharp, disbelieving sound that cracked down the spine of the hall like thunder in a graveyard. He turned slowly, gaze sweeping the empty seats, then the bone columns, then the dark ceiling where thousands of years of law had once burned with pride. Not one, he murmured. He looked to Valak. Do you know how many war oaths I've bled for those bastards? I was there, Valak said softly. Every time. 7 campaigns, Eryndor said. 3 civil rebellions quelled. 4 blood feasts halted. 87 howling nights when I held the lattice myself while they slept safe in their keeps. He stepped up onto the first tier of the empty council dais. Raised his voice. I bled for you cowards. His echo rang back in the empty space. He looked down at his hand. Opened it slowly. The mark on his palm still burned faintly, Cerynthia's sigil overlapping his. Dream ink seared into skin that refused to forget. She stood in the shadows beyond the throne, silent. Watching. He didn't call to her. He didn't need to. She stepped into the light barefoot, in simple robes the color of morning ash. Her throat still bore the faint shimmer of Cerynthea's nightmare collar, though it no longer pulsed. That was her doing. She dampened it. With pain. With will. With a silence that wasn't submission, but rebellion refined. He looked at her. Then at the empty seats. This, he said, voice bitter, is what I gave up for you. She didn't flinch. She crossed the space between them slowly, then knelt at his feet. She didn't bow her head. She kissed his palm, where the sigil burned, then whispered into his mind. Then let me hell in your place. For 1,000 years. Until the skies forget your enemies' names. His chest cracked with something too old for sorrow and too young for peace. He dropped to his knees, pulled her into his arms. Neither of them cried. There was no time left for grief. Only preparation. Because across the southern sky, the shadows were moving. A flicker. Then a full image. Projected across every dream-bound mind in the north. Cerynthia. He stood in a throne of thorns and song steel, crimson chains running from his shoulders to the spines of bound figures kneeling before him, echoes. Dreamcasters. Girls with silver threaded mouths and branded skin. They all looked like her. Exactly like her. The vision was a nightmare of perfection. Each one knelt, eyes empty, songs trapped in their throats. And then, he activated one. She rose, body trembling, and began to sing. The sound wasn't audible, but every wolf in Norvale heard it in their marrow. Echo detonations rippled through the lattice. 2 towers cracked. A third ruptured entirely, shattering into a storm of bone and sigil ash. The broadcast cut out. Then Cerynthea's voice echoed through the dream channel, clear and amused. 3 days, he said. That's how long you have left Northvale. 3 days, and I'll use her voice, her song, her echo, her mark, to break your king. You gave her to me once. I'm only finishing the story. Silence returned. But it wasn't peace. Eryndor rose slowly, arms still around Cerynthia. He looked to Valak. The warrior gave a single nod. Just us then, Eryndor said. Just us. Eryndor looked out over the ruin of his kingdom. And whispered, then we will be enough. Chapter 13. The Wolf Who Refused to Kneel. The moon above blood all was whole. For now. Eryndor stood on the uppermost balcony, the wind dragging at his half-unfastened cloak, blood crusted on his knuckles from the last Dreamborn skirmish, though he barely felt it. Northvale was quiet tonight, not the hush of peace, but the dread stillness that came before siege. Behind him, the doors to the skybind chamber hung open. Cerynthia was asleep inside, but not resting, not healing. Dreaming had become too dangerous. Even unconscious, her breath came shallow and uneven, her skin pale with the strain of fractured dream links. Each connection she forged now tried to pull more from her than it gave, like the world wanted her used, not loved. And still, she had refused to leave. Still, she had told him, with her hands in his and her lips against his crown, "Whatever end you walk toward, I'll be there first." He didn't deserve her. But she had given herself anyway. He should have known Cerynthia would come that night. He should have felt the shift in the air, the dream lattice tightening like a net, the world sharpening to the edge of inevitability. But the voice caught him unprepared all the same. "She's dying, you know." Eryndor froze. The world around him darkened. And when he looked down from the balcony, the city had vanished. Only a dreamscape remained, carved in molten bone and violet starlight, vast and shifting. And in the center of it, waiting like a spider in silk, stood Cerynthia. Tall, cloaked in singing chains, smiling with teeth made of broken vows. Eryndor clenched his jaw. Come to beg, come to offer peace. That word, in Cerynthea's mouth, was an insult. "I offer you half the north," he said, dream chains pulsing with hypnotic rhythm. 30 years of silence. A seat untouched by my army. Your bloodline preserved. Eryndor said nothing. Cerynthia took a step closer. "All I ask is her. Another step. I'll keep her humming in a dream cage. Painless. Deliriously loved. You'll never have to see her broken. She'll think it was you who set her free." Eryndor's fingers twitched. A blade of light appeared in his hand, dream-forged, wrought from old oaths. "Give her to me," Cerynthia said, "and you walk away as king of the spared." Eryndor stepped into the dream ground and slashed without warning. The sound rang like shattering glass. Cerynthia parried with a wave of his hand, chains flared, coiling midair to meet the blow. They collided. The battlefield shook. Cerynthea's laughter echoed even as blood spilled from Eryndor's lip. "Still no diplomacy from you. Always teeth first." "Only because I've never met a leash I didn't want to bite through." Cerynthea's expression darkened. The next strike wasn't symbolic. It hurt. Chains caught Eryndor's ankle, his wrist, sliced along his side. His vision blurred. Blood soaked into the dream beneath him. Still, he stood. Still, he didn't kneel. Cerynthia walked in a slow circle. "She's not built for war, you know," he said softly. "You keep dragging her deeper into your ruin, and she keeps bleeding to keep you whole. You call it love, but it's always been martyrdom." Eryndor wavered on his feet, then straightened. "If I kneel now," he said, voice hoarse, "she will never believe in me again." Cerynthia tilted his head. "And that matters?" "Yes." A chain whipped forward, caught Eryndor across the chest. He staggered. Knees dipped. And for a moment, the dream world watched. But he didn't fall. He roared. Not a command. Not a battle cry. Just pain. Refusal. Defiance. Somewhere beyond the dreamscape, in the real world, Cerynthia heard him. And answered. She surged upward from the bed, eyes blazing silver white, hands convulsing with echo fire. Though unconscious, her mind found his. And she sang. Not melody. Not beauty. A scream through the lattice. One meant to sever. The dream link between Cerynthia and Eryndor burned. Flames licked through the air like ink set ablaze. Cerynthea's form cracked. He hissed and tried to close the space, but Cerynthia's voice, fragile as it was, slammed into the lattice like a falling god. Chains unraveled. The battlefield tore. Eryndor fell to one knee, not in surrender, but in collapse, and reached for her through the bond, his fingers curled in air that no longer held shape. Stop, he whispered. You'll break yourself. But she kept singing. until the link collapsed, until the world fell dark, and silence took them both. He woke hours later. The sky was red with pre-dawn. Blood red. Beside him, Cerynthia lay still. Her body barely breathed. A small trail of blood ran from her ear. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "Why?" he asked softly, as if she could hear. Her lips moved. A whisper cracked and faint. "You don't need peace. I am your peace." He buried his face in her neck and stayed there, long after the dream light faded. That night, the sky split open. Above North Vale, the moon cracked, not truly, but in the dream view of the city, the moon lattice warped to show what was coming. A crimson slit across the stars. Within it, an enormous eye. Woven. Gold-ringed. Unblinking. The mark of the Chain Lord. Cerynthia was no longer speaking. He was coming. Chapter 14. The Kingdom That Bled Silver. The silent chamber lived up to its name. No birdsong reached its stone windows. No bells from the distant war-torn towers. Only the muffled breath of a kingdom suspended on the edge of grief. Cerynthia lay on the high cot in the center, wrapped in white cloth made for burial rites, not healing. Her skin glistened faintly under the oil lamps, not with sweat, but with the glimmer of silver. Healer Tully stood at the foot of the cot, his hands stained with dream ink and worry. "It's not just bleeding," he whispered, voice brittle. "It's pouring from her marrow. Every bone mark she's ever held has cracked." Eryndor said nothing. He sat beside her, elbows on his knees, head bowed, one hand wrapped around her limp fingers. He had not changed his clothes in 5 days. Had not shaved. Had not slept. Tully's placed the vial of bone water back on the stone shelf. "She's fading." "No," Eryndor said. "She won't last a week. Not like this. Not unless we cut the resonance completely. Sever every line. That might stabilize her. But even then." Eryndor didn't look up. "You mean she'd live without dreaming?" "Yes. No songs. No shared memories. No tethering to you. A life without voice. Without him." He nodded once, coldly. "Then that isn't life." Healer Tully's left. Not because he wanted to, but because there was nothing left he could do. Eryndor remained. The hours passed like bleeding seasons. He counted every breath she took, every twitch, every shudder. Her skin began to glow faintly around her ribs. Her sigil had split. The ink had thinned. Her blood was laced with threads of silver, leaking through her fingertips like moonlight escaping a cracked vessel. When she finally woke, she didn't gasp. She exhaled, as if she'd known she would return. "Eryndor," she whispered. He was already looking at her. "I feel," she said slowly, "like I'm forgetting how it felt to touch the world." His hand cupped her cheek. "Then I'll remind you. Every hour." "No," she smiled, and even that hurt. "We both know this is breaking me." "You're not broken." She laughed softly, but it turned into a cough. Silver spat into the cloth at her side. "I'm past repair." His jaw clenched. "You're past sleep." "That's not the same." "I want to offer something." "Don't." "I have to." Her fingers gripped his sleeve. "Eryndor, you've carried me too long. The kingdom is collapsing because of what I am. If I offer myself, if I let the dream lattice use me as balance, then Cerynthia can't use my voice to destroy you. Or them." His eyes burned. "No. I just need you to do one thing." He was already shaking his head. "You must be the one to end it," she said. "It has to be your howl. Your mark. That's the only way the balance ritual seals. Self-imposed termination won't stabilize it. The blood has to be royal." He stood. Turned away. She continued, softer now. "You don't even have to strike. Just seal the death print. Just say the words, and I'll do the rest. Please. Don't make this harder." He didn't move. "You always protect me," she whispered. "Let me protect you once. Let me be the shield for once." He turned. Walked back. Sat beside her again. Then leaned in, very close. I can die 1,000 times, Cerynthia, he said, voice like velvet sharpened on rage. But no one touches even a hair on your head. Not even you. Her eyes brimmed. She looked away. If you want me to die, she whispered, don't be gentle. Just don't hold me like I'm still yours while you do it. He pulled her to his chest and did exactly that. Held her. Fiercely. Like she was burning and he didn't care if he caught fire. Her tears bled silver against his skin. Her voice cracked in his mind. I don't want to go. Then stay. I'll take everything with me. I'll burn it with you, he said. Gladly. They didn't speak after that. But the silence was no longer empty. It was a promise. That night, she stole from the healer's satchel a single vial. Dream's Rest. A pale blue liquid meant to suppress lattice instability for those whose sigils had ruptured beyond repair. It wouldn't save her. But it would hold her. For a time. Long enough to walk beside him in the final war. Long enough to fake strength she no longer possessed. She drank it in silence. And as the potion slid through her veins, she felt her dream body stabilize. The rupture slowed. Her sigils stilled. But so did something else. When she reached for Eryndor's hand the next morning, she felt nothing. No warmth. No pressure. No spark. Her touch could no longer sense his. And soon, he would no longer feel hers. But he didn't notice. Not yet. He was too busy sharpening his blade. Too busy whispering her name into the wind as if it could still answer back. She smiled at him. And lied with her eyes. Because the truth was unbearable. She would stand beside him in the war to come. But she would do it as a shadow. And she would die long before her body did. Somewhere deep within the dream lattice, a second voice stirred. A mirror version. A twin. Cerynthia watched it take form in the dream forge he had built for this exact moment. Her face. Her voice. Her rage rewritten. Soon, he whispered. The echo smiled. Chapter 15. The Howl That Drove Wolves Mad. The Black Veil Bastion trembled beneath the roar of the king's call. Not wind. Not war drums. But the howl of a mark raw, ancient, brutal, that cracked the bone wall at its base and echoed through every dream-bound skull in the kingdom. Eryndor stood on the highest turret, his arms stretched skyward, the royal sigil on his palm glowing white-hot. The crown howl surged from his throat, not as melody but command. It seared through the dream lattice like wildfire through oil, rousing every last sleeping soldier still tied to his line. And they answered. Not with order, but with chaos. In the city below, wolves convulsed mid-battle prayer. Marked warriors turned on each other. Alpha guards clutched their heads, snarling, blades drawn against allies they could no longer recognize as kin. The howl had gone too deep. It touched the marrow. It dragged up every buried scream, every suppressed instinct, every unhealed echo. It broke them. Eryndor's chest heaved. His crown burned with cold light. His spine shook with every scream from below. He hadn't meant for it to go this far, but the time for gentleness had ended when Cerynthia cracked the bone gates 3 hours earlier. The war had arrived. And he had needed every blade. Even the unstable ones. Eryndor, someone shouted behind him. He didn't turn. He already knew who it was. Cerynthia stood at the threshold of the watchtower, her robe soaked in silver-threaded sweat, her skin paling by the hour. She was trembling. Barefoot. Already bleeding from one ear. You have to shut it down, she gasped. They're killing each other. I know, he rasped. I can still stop it. I still have the echo. He turned to face her, eyes wide with something more dangerous than fear. No. I can still sing, she said, already walking toward him. I know the rhythm. I can invert the call. Restabilize the lattice. All I need is... You'll die. Her voice was calm. So will they. He grabbed her shoulders. You are not their dream martyr. Her smile was soft. Heartbreaking. I never was. But I've always been your voice. He shook his head. You've already given too much. You've lost your sense of touch, your sleep, your breath. I'm not trying to be brave, she interrupted. I'm trying to end it. And then she pulled away from him, dropped to her knees, and sang. It wasn't a song meant for beauty. It was guttural, splintered, more breath than tone. The mute reversal. Her voice cracked like glass in wind. All around the bastion, the tremor stopped. One by one, the bonded warriors shuddered, eyes rolling back, then collapsed, dream links forcibly sealed by the echo she wove into the air. 1, 2, 5, 10, 50. She kept singing. Her hands dug into the stone to anchor herself. Each time she formed a note, blood slipped from her ears. Eryndor dropped beside her. Stop. Her voice trembled. There's still more. You're bleeding inside your skull, Cerynthia. They're still screaming. You still haven't saved yourself. She looked up at him. Eyes wet. Lips trembling. I've saved you. He grabbed her wrists, held them tightly. You want to die for them? No, she whispered. I want to die with you, she said. If I don't close this, we both will anyway. He let go. She sang again. Her voice cracked halfway through the final phrase. Her throat convulsed. A harsh cough overtook her, and she bent forward, silver fluid trailing from her mouth like moonlight unspooled. But it worked. The last of the mad warriors dropped. Unconscious. Breathing. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Until the southwest wall exploded. Stone. Fire. Shattered lattice. The chain army had breached the outer gate. Cerynthia had waited for the precise moment her song would leave the kingdom breathless. They were inside. A quarter of the city fell within the hour. The Dream Scouts called it the Bleed. And only one person in all of Norvale could still walk through dream space unharmed. Cerynthia. Because she was no longer fully here. She stood on the bastion edge now, trembling, her hand braced against the wall, her eyes glazed in echo haze. The dream's rest she'd taken days ago had stabilized her body, but it came at the price she could no longer hide. The lattice recognized her. The world did not. Her fingertips no longer sensed texture. Her skin no longer tingled at touch. She felt herself drifting further by the hour. Eryndor reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. She just looked down at his fingers. Her voice no louder than air. Can I still feel you? He froze. Then slowly, achingly, lowered his hand before it could touch hers. She saw it. Her smile broke. She didn't cry. But the silence between them said enough. And far above, the sky began to bleed again, this time not with war, but with warning. A red slit opened where moonlight should be. Within it, the wolf eye. Gold-ringed. Watching. The Chain Lord was coming. Chapter 16. The Bride of the Chain Killer. The Bone Forge keep reeked of war and ghosts. Beneath its jagged towers and flame-scorched flags, in the lowest chamber where silence pressed in like frost, Eryndor stood beside Cerynthia in a room that had once been used for dream forging, and now for dream execution. The captured chain-born girl was kneeling in the center of the sigil ring. She looked like she should have been innocent, no older than 17, eyes wide, skin soft. But the way she smiled when she opened her mouth was wrong. You think she's the only one? The girl crooned. Cerynthia's fingers twitched at her side. The chain-born lifted her chin. He's made hundreds. Thousands. I'm just the one who is allowed to speak to you. The tone was familiar. Too familiar. Eryndor stiffened. The chain-born's voice was Cerynthia's. Perfectly replicated. Even the pitch that caught when she said certain syllables. Even the breath at the end of sentences. Even the pause before emotion. Stop, Cerynthia said. The girl tilted her head. Why? Don't you want to see what he made from your blueprint? Cerynthia walked forward slowly, eyes hard. You're not me. The girl's smile widened. But I could be. With enough polish. With enough pain. He keeps the best parts of you. Refines the others. He says the original doesn't matter, Only the resonance does. Cerynthia stopped just inside the ring. "You're a shadow," she said softly. "A cheap echo." And then the girl sang. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a battle cry. It was a lullaby, delicate, haunting, beautiful. It ripped through the chamber like acid wind. Cerynthia staggered. Eryndor moved to catch her, but she raised one hand. "I can stop it," she hissed. "Not alone," he growled. She looked at him. The pain was written across her face. Her bones ached with it. Her lungs rattled like broken bells. But her eyes, they were clear. "I know how to break it." He stared at her. "Don't," he said. "It's the only way to sever the bond. If I do this, her copy thread will snap." "Cerynthia." She stepped forward, breath shallow. Then turned to him, suddenly, gently, took his face in both hands. And kissed him. It wasn't tender. It wasn't chaste. It was acclaiming. Her sigils flared. His pulse synced to hers. And in the dream that bloomed around them, the world split. They stood naked in the void of shared memory. Cerynthia gripped his shoulders, breathless. "I'm sorry." "For what?" he asked, even though he already knew. "For doing everything you begged me not to." And then she drove the seal into place, their seal, forged from two halves of pain, and the dream echo shrieked. The chain-born copy clutched at her own throat as the false resonance collapsed. The lullaby turned to static. Her skin cracked. The copy burned from within. Silver fire. Her voice. Her truth. When Cerynthia broke the kiss, Eryndor caught her just as she collapsed. She was trembling, mouth bleeding. Her body still there. But something was wrong. She wasn't fully anchored anymore. She blinked up at him slowly, as if there was a delay between her soul and her body. "Cerynthia," he whispered. "What did you do?" Her voice was faint. Hollow. "I cut my dream tether. To sever the mirror." He cradled her tighter. "You broke your sync." She nodded weakly. "It was the only way." His hand shook. Her head rolled against his shoulder. I'm still me, aren't I?" she whispered. "Even if I can't feel when I speak. Even if I look like the copies. Even if I was made to break." He touched her face. "You are not an echo. You are the howl the world wasn't ready to hear." She laughed, a cracked, tired sound. He buried his face in her hair. "You want forgiveness?" he rasped. "I can't give it. Not for tearing your soul in half. Not for choosing me as the blade." She closed her eyes. "But I can promise this." He pulled her close, arms wrapped around her fragile form. "I will burn until nothing's left but your name." The chain-born girl's corpse sizzled in the center of the dream ring. Nothing remained but smoke and the faint tremor of her final note. When the dreamscape cleared, Eryndor laid Cerynthia down on the edge of the seal. She didn't stir. Her breath was shallow. Her skin cool. He stared at her hands. Still. Pale. Fading. He touched her palm. No response. He whispered, "Cerynthia." No response. Just the dream pulse in the lattice, still there. Still hers. He exhaled slowly. And then, he closed his eyes. And for a moment, he saw what she had. 100 versions of herself. Dead. Mouths open. Eyes blank. Lying in fields of dream glass. And in every vision, he was there. Crying. Cradling her. Screaming into the sky. Until morning came. Chapter 17. The Council That Never Returned. The last Bone War table stood untouched beneath the stars. It had once held maps of alliances, crystal-scribed troop movements, dream-veil projections of every Beaufort in the north. Now it was a ruin of broken glass and scorched parchment, the ghost of a kingdom's last strategy. Eryndor stood over it with both palms braced flat on the surface, his breath steaming in the frigid air. Frostveil craters stretched behind him, white, barren, echoless. Once a site of coronations and Vauban duels. Now the exile's cliff. There were no more messages from the outer posts. No more replies from the Bone Guard. Not even silence from the capital, only absence. They've defected, Valak said. He didn't look at the war table. His arms were crossed. His eyes were sunken. All of them. Every last remnant of the council. They brought their banners to Cerynthia. Their wolves. Their dreamcasters. Even their daughters. Eryndor's hands curled into fists against the table. They handed him the keys to the lattice. They think he'll spare them. He won't. I know. Eryndor exhaled slowly. When he finally spoke, it was low and steady. The court can fall. The kingdom can rot. But the lattice. He looked up, eyes gleaming like cracked obsidian. We do not surrender that. Valak nodded once. What's your order? Eryndor didn't hesitate. Full soul integration. Strip all external seals. Convert the last dream fortress to internal sync. Anyone who shares a mark with me, we burn as one. Valak didn't blink. You're binding your life to the lattice. Not just mine. A soft sound stirred behind them. Cerynthia stepped into the dying light of the war table fire. She wore no crown, no veil. Just a simple dark robe, her throat bare. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached, but her eyes, gods, her eyes were clear. Steady. Burning like they knew what came next and welcomed it. I heard your command, she said. Eryndor turned to her. She walked to him slowly. I have something to offer. He watched her without speaking. My body is failing, she said. But my dream form is strong. I can anchor you through the last seal, permanently. No. Yes. Her voice didn't waver. I can imprint the final command with my soul. You won't be alone. You'll carry me fully, entirely, in every strike you make. That'll kill you. I'm dying anyway. Then I refuse, he snapped. You don't give what's already breaking. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. She turned his palm upward, then traced a symbol in inkless touch across his skin. I'm not asking you to bury me, she whispered. I'm asking if you want me like this. As I am. As I might not be. If I'm just a ghost of someone you once trusted. If I'm no more real than the Chain Lord's echoes. Stop, he said softly. Do you still want me? He stepped forward, lifted her face in his hands, and said, without breath or hesitation, you are the one person in this world I've never been able to understand. That's why I trust you more than anyone. She closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek. He kissed it away. Then she leaned close, and with a trembling finger, drew her final mark across his lips, a curved arc from one corner of his mouth to the other, carved not in ink but in dream blood. He felt it sear beneath his skin. What is it? He whispered. She smiled faintly. The final vow. Her lips brushed his, soft as a dying star. From now on, she whispered, every wound you dream. I'll bleed for you. He gripped her then, kissed her like the world wasn't ending. And maybe, for a moment, it wasn't. Chapter 18. The Girl Who Died in His Dreams. The Bone Vault Citadel slept. Or it pretended to. Even in the dead of night, its walls pulsed with silent tension, like a fortress built atop the heartbeat of something that no longer remembered being alive. Deep beneath its coldest level, past the halls of shivered memory and vow burial chambers, lay the dream collapse chamber, a place where no wolf entered willingly. Cerynthia had been brought there 6 nights ago, because she had started dying. Not in the waking world, but in the dream. Every time her eyes closed, she fell into a lattice of Cerynthea's making. And every time, the ending was the same. Eryndor stood over her, sword in hand. And her blood, always silver, always warm, ran across his palms as she looked up and whispered, it's all right. I was made for this. Then she died. And she woke. Only to do it again. 7 nights. 7 deaths. The 8th nearly didn't end. He sat beside her now, in the chamber where the dream seal runes spiraled like bone-deep tattoos across the floor. He hadn't slept. He barely breathed. Her body still trembled in unconscious fit, though no fever touched her skin. Her dream mark flared and flickered, splintered between his bond and Cerynthia poison seal like a woman pulled apart by two gods with no mercy between them. He reached to brush a curl of hair from her face, and her eyes snapped open. She gasped and scrambled backward, hands clawing the stone floor. "Don't touch me, Cerynthia." "You." Her voice trembled, her eyes wild. "You killed me." His heart stuttered. "No. You killed me," she repeated, quieter this time. 7 times. She held her hands out like they were covered in invisible blood. "I know it's not real. I know that. But I feel it. I wake and I feel it. My ribs shatter. My throat burns. I see your face every time and I love you, but I don't trust myself to not run." He dropped to his knees before her. "I haven't." "I know," she whispered, weeping now. "I know it's Cerynthia. I know it's a trick. But what if he's not wrong?" She looked up at him, lips trembling. "What if I was built to die in your arms?" His hands shook as he reached for her, but he didn't close the distance. He couldn't. "I would tear myself apart before I ever raised a hand to you," he said. "But if your mind makes me the villain, then maybe the damage is already done." Her eyes met his. And for the first time, he saw something in her break. Not shatter. Just quietly fade. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did he. But the dream still came. Not to her. To him. He sat alone in the collapse echo, barefoot on the lattice that had once sung their vows, and waited. It didn't take long. Cerynthia appeared as a glimmer of crimson and teeth, lounging on a throne made of Cerynthia's lost voices. "Come to beg," the Chain Lord purred. Eryndor didn't answer. Just stood. Still. Eyes like carved obsidian and thunder held beneath a glacier. "I'm listening," Cerynthia said. Eryndor's voice cracked the silence like bone beneath pressure. "Give her peace." The noble Alpha. Still thinking this is about her. "I'll take her place." Cerynthia raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you want an imprint to torment. You want a soul to bend. I already have hers." "Then let her go." Cerynthia laughed. A sharp, beautiful sound that rang through the dream lattice like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. "Would you really trade her final breath just to suffer in her stead?" "Yes," Eryndor said. "Even if she'd never forgive you for it?" He hesitated. "Just one breath." "Then yes." Cerynthia leaned forward. "You know what I'll do to you." "Yes." "You know what I'll make you do." I said yes. There was no heroism in it. No fire. Only resolve. And maybe that was worse. Cerynthia smiled. "I'll consider it," he said. "But I want to see one more thing first." And with a flick of his hand, the dream around them shifted. Eryndor stood now above Cerynthia's broken body. Again. Sword in hand. Her eyes already glazing. And this time, she didn't say it's all right. This time, her lips moved around a different phrase. "I forgive you." He dropped the sword. Fell beside her. Tried to wake himself. But the dream didn't let go. He screamed. He screamed. Chapter 19. The Crown Beneath His Feet. The uncrowned hall was not a place meant for kings. It was built in dream, deep within the red chain nexus, a realm stitched from memory and obedience, where time didn't flow but bled. Where willpower became stone, and regret echoed longer than breath. Here, Cerynthia sat on no throne. He was the throne. A mind-woven mass of consciousness and chain, suspended in the crimson-laced core of the lattice. He shimmered like a god formed of iron and promises, faceless and many-voiced, speaking with a dozen tones in unison. And Eryndor stood before him, unarmed, uncloaked, crown absent. Not because he had lost it. Because he had laid it down. 3 days, Cerynthia said. Give me the girl, and I'll spare your lattice. You may even keep your bones. Perhaps even your name. Eryndor didn't answer. He looked up at the dream web above them, veins of light threaded with thousands of enslaved signatures, each pulse echoing faint fragments of song. Her song. All stolen. All bound. He didn't weep. 3 days, Cerynthia repeated, smiling without lips. Or I lock the lattice. Forever. No more dreaming. No more howling. No more you. Eryndor turned and walked away. He didn't run. He didn't beg. But as he stepped from the nexus into the thinning strands of moonlight, he felt it. This was the last decision he would make with both feet on the ground. He returned to Bone Vault, entered the quietest chamber of the fractured palace, where dust still settled on the runes from their last bonfire. She was sleeping there, curled like a petal before the bloom, breath shallow, hand curled around the folded edge of a half-burned vow page. She had sung herself to sleep, he could tell. Her throat was raw. Her lips cracked. But there was still music clinging to the space she'd touched, like the dream hadn't yet figured out she was resting. He knelt beside her and watched her for hours. Then he wrote. The parchment wasn't new. It bore the mark of the first vow he'd ever taken as king. He tore the crown seal from it, folded it once, then again, and tucked it beneath her hand. She stirred, didn't wake. He whispered against her forehead, I chose you. Not the kingdom. Not the crown. You. And then he left. Cerynthia woke to absence. The fire cold. The bond stretched thin. She reached for the dream thread and found it clamped. Cut. Not by pain, but by will. Her hand brushed the letter. She opened it slowly. There was no salutation. Only his writing, blunt and sharp and mournfully neat. You were always the last song I wanted to hear, and the one I was never brave enough to let finish. I don't deserve to be your final memory, so I'll become your silence instead. If I don't return, let the lattice forget me. But never forget this. I would have given the world to stay beside you. But I won't give you up to bury me. Not again. Not ever. The page burned in her hand. Not from fire. From rage. She stood and walked, every step barefoot across the echo chambers until she reached the black spire beyond the frost wall, the Ensong Tower, forbidden to all dream-bound wolves save the dying and the disavowed. She entered alone, sealed the door, and began to reverse-write the imprint he had once placed upon her. Pain tore through her like lightning spun through bone. Her sigil cracked. Her ribs screamed. But she kept going, because if he wouldn't let her die with him, then she would live for him, even if that meant trading herself for him one final time. Outside the tower, Eryndor knelt. He had felt the shift, the rebind. The seal he'd broken was being rewritten from her side. That kind of tether would kill her. He pressed his forehead against the cold stone gate. You stubborn girl. Inside, she was already bleeding from the ears. She had ripped open her side to scribe the final glyph against her ribs. Dream blood pooled at her knees, but her voice held steady. She sang not for him, not for war, but for one final transference. Her dreams to him, her end to him, so he might live. Eryndor whispered, if this is the only way you'll stay with me. He dropped to both knees, then lower. Then sing until I forget what silence means. She heard him, barely, and gave her last verse. I hope you forget me. Her voice cracked, then steadied. But not what love is. Far beyond the gate, in the nexus of Cerynthea's mind, a flicker of power died. The Chain Lord opened his eyes and smiled. She made her choice, then added softly, now it's his turn. Chapter 20. The Wolf Who Should Have Left Her. Shattered Spine Ridge was never meant to be a battlefield. It was a place for endings, a jagged cliff carved by time and wind, overlooking the frost-choked plains where the ancient Dreambound wolves once held their last. Now it would be where the north bled to its knees. Eryndor stood at its edge, cloak torn, armor scorched. Around him, only 500 remained, once the elite of the Dreambound legions, now shadows of glory, bruised, limping, some half-mad from echo fractures. Their bone marks flickered with overuse, their howls no longer syncopated but staggering, ragged things. Behind them, the Tower of Last Bone, the final dream fortress still holding any viable resonance field. Ahead of them, the dark tide. Cerynthia army, not just men and beasts now, but nightmare-forged warwalkers stitched from both flesh and lattice, moving in unnatural rhythm. The chain of command was literal, and every unit sang the same note in eerie unison. The sky had long since turned red. The wind stank of ozone and dried ink. Valak approached him quietly, blood seeping from a wound beneath his left shoulder. They've broken the southern seal. I know. Westwatch fell 2 hours ago. I know. Hyphon Bastion stopped sending pings. All our inclines are dead. I know, Valak. He nodded slowly, then paused. You could still leave. Eryndor didn't answer. You're not bound here, Valak continued. You could take her. Run east. What's left of us could scatter, rebuild. Small. Quiet. Eryndor turned his head slowly. She can't sing in hiding. Then she'll live. Eryndor's voice was low. She's already dying. Valak's jaw clenched. Then let her go gentle. But Eryndor only looked out toward the field where the dream-stitched army advanced like a bleeding star. I won't carry her into a world where she can't sing, he said. I won't ask her to outlive herself. Valak closed his eyes. Then this is our last stand. Eryndor nodded. And night fell. In the heart of the Tower of Last Bone, Cerynthia lay within the Dreambound halo, a circular chamber carved into the mountain's ribs, lined with resonant stones that once held the voices of kings. Now, they held only her. Her body was still, breath shallow, throat wrapped in etched sigil bands. Her voice was no longer hers alone, it had become lattice itself. She no longer sang to heal. She was the song. And tonight, for the last time, she called him into the dream. He came as he always did, wounded, proud, silent. She stood barefoot in the dreamscape's reflection of their first memory, a long silver field where no war had yet bled, and only the wind carried music. She looked like the version of her that still believed in tomorrows. He knew it wasn't real. And still, he touched her cheek. She leaned into it. You should leave me behind, she said softly. I won't. You were born to be king. I was born to hear you sing. She looked away. Her voice broke. You've already chosen me once. You don't have to keep dying for it. He cupped her face. I'm not dying for you, he said. I'm giving up the world that couldn't keep you safe. Her eyes flooded with tears. He wiped them gently. Then promise me something, she whispered. He nodded. When I'm gone, when I can't sing anymore, promise me you'll howl. Loud. Once. He hesitated. Please, she said. So I know you still remember how. He kissed her forehead. And in the waking world, her body arched inside the halo. The final phase had begun. She was transcribing her voice into pure resonance, no longer needing lungs or lips or chords. Her consciousness would live as lattice, as protection, as shield. But it meant she would no longer be heard, only felt. And even then, only by him. Eryndor stood over her body as the last glyph burned itself into her throat. Cerynthia, he whispered. You are every silence I ever feared. Her lips moved one final time. He leaned down and caught the words. I'm not afraid anymore. Then she went still. Not dead. Not alive. Just there, everywhere and nowhere. At dawn, the tower doors opened. Eryndor stepped out in full regalia, crownless, but marked. Around him, the 500 fell into formation. The ground shivered. The sky fractured. Cerynthea's vanguard screamed their first note. And from deep inside the halo, a single echo returned. A song. Chapter 21. The Wolves Who Wouldn't Listen. Frostbind Bastion burned blue in the night. The frost fires along the Moobone Ridge had finally guttered, once the perimeter flares of the northern Dream defenses, now reduced to sparks and smoke, nothing but whispering ruin. The sky no longer sang. Even the stars had turned away. And beneath it, within the cracked bones of the final bastion wall, Eryndor knelt in blood. Not his. Valak's. The Alpha Commander lay against a ruined slab of sigilstone, eyes half shut, breath shallow and rasping. His armor had been pierced in 3 places. His left side bled openly, and the Dreambind at his throat flickered, unstable, barely keeping his consciousness tethered. "You should have left," Eryndor said. Valak coughed. "And missed the king's last rage?" "No, thank you." "Idiot." "A loyal one. You were supposed to survive." Valak didn't answer. He reached instead into the folds of his tunic, dragging free a folded strip of encrypted dreamcloth. Eryndor took it carefully, eyes narrowing as he saw the wax seal. "Council. The old one. From before the betrayal." Valak's lips were chapped when he spoke again. "They were planning to strip you long before the war reached the gates. The other Alphas, they sent terms to Cerynthia. Offered peace. A surrender, without you." Eryndor's hands tightened on the cloth. "When?" "Months ago. They thought you wouldn't hold. They were ready to bury your name." He exhaled. Long and slow. Then he stood, tore the strip in half, and let the ashes fall to Valak's chest. "I didn't hold this place for them." His voice was quiet steel. "I didn't bleed for banners. I didn't burn for thrones. I held this line because she still had a song left." Behind him, the dream lattice cracked. He turned, and there she was. Not her body, but the projection. The echo. Cerynthia's voice filled the night air like a prayer half denied. She stood barefoot in the moonlit ruin of the inner court, a glowing figure stitched from dreamlight and sacrifice, humming a song that no longer needed words to wound. Each note spilled from her lips in waves of silver. And each time, a part of her physical body somewhere in the tower's heart died in response, flesh for harmony, breath for balance. He could feel it. He knew it. "Stop," he whispered into the dark. "You're killing yourself." The echo of her smile was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. She didn't stop singing. Instead, she walked toward him and spoke, not aloud, but through the lattice. "I'm not whole anymore." He reached for her. His fingers passed through light. Her projection trembled. "You don't have to keep burning just to keep me from fading." He closed his eyes. "No," he whispered. "But I'm not letting them end the song early." Her voice cracked on the next note. She stumbled. The dream form glitched, shimmering, stabilized. She knelt before him and bowed her head. "I'm tired." He knelt too. And for one last moment, they breathed in tandem, even if one of them no longer had lungs. Behind them, Valak choked on blood and laughter. "You two always made war look like something holy." Eryndor turned, knelt beside him once more. Valak's hand gripped his wrist. "Tomb beneath the citadel," he said. "What?" "There's a breach path. Ancient dreamline. It links straight to the base of Cerynthia spire. You were never supposed to know. Hidden under the old wolf code. But you'll find it now." He shuddered. "Because that's where you end this." Eryndor didn't move. "I'm not leaving her." "You'll take her," Valak rasped. "What's left?" "What is? And you'll bring that bastard down with whatever's left of us stitched into your back." His grip faltered, then faded. A moment later, his dream link shattered with a sound like glass under ocean weight. Eryndor didn't cry. There wasn't time for mourning anymore. Just promise. Just war. As dawn struggled to rise over the ash-choked peaks, Cerynthia stood in the center of his dream crucible, wrapped in iron cords, surrounded by rows of singers without tongues. He turned toward the north, smiled, and whispered, 7 days. Then louder, through the echo chain. 7 days, and the Wolf King will carry her corpse to my throne. The dream trembled, but didn't break. Not yet. Because on the ruined steps of Frostbind Bastion, Cerynthia's voice rose again. And this time, it wasn't beautiful. It was defiant. Chapter 22, The Moon That Forgot Her Name. The Tower of Final Dreaming stood silent, as if already mourning. Its spires rose like broken fingers into a sky dimmed not by storm, but by fatigue, exhausted starlight, thinning moonlight, a kingdom at the edge of a final breath. Cerynthia walked its inner halls barefoot. Not because she chose to. Because she had forgotten how to wear shoes. She passed beneath runes carved in Dreambound, runes she herself had sung into existence once upon a war, and didn't pause. Didn't blink. The names engraved there meant nothing now. Not even her own. She no longer remembered what her name was. Only that someone used to speak it with reverence. Someone with a voice like carved steel, and hands that shook when they touched her even after all these years. Eryndor. The name flickered. Her lips moved, forming it, but it sounded strange. Like a note sung on the wrong side of memory. She frowned. Let it go. The Echo Priestesses waited at the top of the tower. They were not women anymore, just fragments. Dream-thin forms left behind by the first bone singers, bound to the core of the North Stream lattice like flickering flame lilies. They did not speak in words, only in harmonics. They sang her welcome. And she answered. Perfect pitch. Flawless cadence. Even though her hands trembled, even though her eyes did not remember what color his were, her voice never wavered. Not once. Because some things are etched too deeply to be stolen. Even by madness. Even by Cerynthia. Eryndor found her there. She was seated on the edge of the central sigil ring, legs tucked beneath her, silver hair unbraided, fingers stained with the residue of echo runes. She looked at him with a soft smile. Are you the one I loved? He flinched. Then knelt beside her. Yes. You look sad. I am. Because someone's dying? He swallowed hard. Yes. She tilted her head, gaze curious. Is it me? He closed his eyes. Then nodded. She touched her lips, then her throat. I still remember how to sing. Isn't that strange? He reached out to hold her hand. She let him. Then said, almost cheerfully, I have an idea. He looked at her. I could become the weapon, she said. Seal me into the core. Strip the memory, the fear, the self. Just the voice. Just the fire. You aim it. I won't need to think. I'll never forget the song. He didn't answer. Say yes, she said. No. She blinked, genuinely surprised. But why not? I wouldn't be scared anymore. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't dream. I'd just be yours. That's exactly why, he said hoarsely. Because you wouldn't be you. She smiled again. Not bitterly. Gently. You still don't want me to die. He pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist. I never learned how to let you, he whispered. That's my shame. I've sent thousands to the void and never blinked. But I can't teach my hands how to loosen around you. She laid her head on his chest. And for a while, they didn't speak. The Echo Priestesses hummed around them. Low. Mournful. Beautiful. Eventually, she stirred. I'll go into the core, she said softly. But not as your weapon. As your promise. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. Her gaze wavered. Faded. Cleared again. I'll give you one last chance, she said. To strike back. For everyone who never got to sing. For every dream that broke under his chains. He nodded. But his hands were trembling. You won't remember me, he whispered. I already don't. The words sliced through him. She reached up and touched his face. But I remember how you made me feel. And that's more than name. That's more than war. He kissed her one last time. There was no urgency. No lust. Just a long ache of memory pressed between lips too tired to lie. She entered the lattice core at dusk. The Echo Priestesses sealed the gateway behind her with a final verse known only to the dying and the kings. Her body dissolved into resonance. Her voice did not. That night, the northern dream lattice surged for the first time in months. The sigil rings glowed again. The ink lines flared back to life. And across the battlefield, Cerynthia felt it. A pulse. A scream not made with lungs. Not made with hope. A scream forged from pure love. He smiled. And began to prepare. Back in the tower, Eryndor knelt before the last brazier. And from the dream core, her final whisper echoed out. When you howl for me one last time. I'll wake up. Chapter 23. The Throne That Forgot How to Kneel. Snow fell on the dead. It drifted in slow spirals through the shattered sky over woven ridge walls, softening the crimson-stained stone where Valak's body had been laid to rest just hours before. There was no time to bury him. Not with the crownless gate broken at last. Not with Cerynthia standing just beyond it. The Chain Lord had arrived. Not as shadow. Not as echo. But in flesh and chain, flanked by an army that shimmered with dream steel and war-sung silence. His cloak dragged over the frost. His hands held a sealed letter, stitched in bone thread, edges dipped in echo ink. He raised it toward the ruined parapet. "North King," he said, voice amplified by the dream lattice he had already conquered. "Your line has broken. Your gates have no crown. You kneel now, or you fall forever." On the wall above, Eryndor didn't flinch. His armor was cracked. His blade notched. His sigils bled ink from his palms. But he stood as if he had never learned how to bend. He said nothing, only reached for the chain-bound letter as it floated to him by dream current. He opened it, read it once, then, without expression, dropped it into the brazier. The flames hissed. The ink screamed as it burned. And then he turned to the last standing pyre at the wall's center, Valak's old blood seal still smeared across the stones, and drew his knife. He sliced his palm, pressed it to Valak's mark, and lit the northern dream tower again. A howl rose from the peak. Low, broken, defiant. The war was not over. And Cerynthia laughed. So be it. He lifted one gauntlet hand. And the lock singers advanced. They were an army of ghosts made flesh, lock song brides, created from fragments of Cerynthia's captured resonance. Each one bore her voice. Each one sang like her. Each one looked just close enough to hurt. Eryndor's forces, barely 100 soldiers now, barely more than names clinging to dying marks, staggered at the sound. "Lay down your arms," the voices begged. "Eryndor, it's me. I don't want to see you die. I don't want to die again." He stood atop the parapet, unmoving. And when the youngest soldier, a boy of 17, bone mark still fresh, turned to him with tears in his eyes and whispered, "It sounds like her," Eryndor answered with a voice carved from iron and loss, "She would never beg me to surrender." The boy nodded, straightened his shoulders, and raised his blade. Inside the Dreambound conduit, Cerynthia's real voice twitched. She could feel them. The copies. The stolen notes. She couldn't stop them. But she could listen. She knew what she'd never say. And her will sparked deep in the core. Cerynthia narrowed his eyes. He lifted his arm again. More lock singers surged forward. Their notes twisted now, no longer imitating plea, but mimicry of dreams. Visions of a peaceful world. A healed world. A world where she lived. One soldier sobbed. Another fell to his knees. Eryndor didn't shout. He simply knelt beside the dying fire at the top of the crownless gate and placed one hand to the ground. He whispered something no one heard. And the sigil beneath him flared. A ward. A recognition tether. A lattice pulse. He looked to the army and said, "She isn't out there. She's in here." He tapped his chest. "My ribs remember her song." And then the real dream call surged up through the ground like a geyser of silver flame. A pulse, barely perceptible to the lock singers. But to those who truly carried her mark, it was a heartbeat. Theirs. Theirs with hers. The lock singer's next note cracked. A few faltered. One screamed as the lattice rejected her. Cerynthia flinched. And Eryndor smiled. Not with triumph, but with faith. He turned back toward the tower. And entered the sanctum of echo. There, the sigil stones flickered. And her voice came again. This time not as a note, but as a question. Soft. Tentative. From within the dream. But through a face not her own. A face shaped by memory. Fractured eyes. Lips too sharp, too uncertain. "Do you still love me?" she asked. Her voice cracked. I don't look like me anymore. He looked at the projection. Didn't blink. I never loved your face. He stepped forward. I loved the way your voice made me remember mine. She smiled. But the projection began to fade, and her last whisper rippled through him like the first time she ever sang. Then sing with me once more, so I can remember who I am. And so he did. From the top of the crownless gate, with no kingdom left, no crown on his head, no army at his back, Eryndor howled. Not as a king, as a mate, as a man who had forgotten everything, except her. Chapter 24, The Howl That Shattered the Chains. The core of the Northvale Dreamspire was not made for mortals. It pulsed with the resonance of 1,000 years of bond ink, blood, memory, and vow, an echo of every howl ever offered in the name of love, war, kingdom, or grief. A lattice of soul-woven strands, held taut by the breath of the last true song still humming in its center. Her. Cerynthia. She no longer had a body. Not in the way the world remembered her. What remained of her lay suspended in the dream core, a web of voice and light, voice and fire. The last heartbeat of Northvale's dream lattice. Her hair floated like threads of moonlight in a sea of silence. Her eyes were closed, but her mouth moved. Soundlessly, Eryndor stood at the threshold. Armor shattered. Blade gone. Only the wool mark on his palms still glowed, and even that flickered with exhaustion. But he carried the last crown of his kind, not on his head, but within his chest. He stepped into the chamber of star song and ruin, and knelt before her. You were always the one who sang, he said quietly. But tonight, let me be the one who screams. He raised his bloodied hand, pressed it to the lattice altar, and the entire world shuddered. 1,000 shattered dream threads recoiled. Cerynthia iron network twisted and shrieked as the reversal began. Eryndor's king mark ignited. The howl that followed was not sound. It was rupture. It was surrender. It was devotion. The North's howl. Raw. Primeval. Every echo tether Cerynthia had ever chained across the dreaming plain snapped. One by one, the false brides dissolved into dust. One by one, the lock singers collapsed, howling not for conquest, but in agony. One by one, the voices that had stolen hers were silenced. And in the center of it all, her mouth finally found sound again. Her voice ripped from the core like lightning born through silence. Eryndor. He staggered, turned to her, eyes wide. Because for the first time since the sacrifice, she said his name. He stumbled closer, hands outstretched, as if to touch her even though he couldn't. If you can call me back, he said, breathless, then I'll die beside you. The core flared. She opened her eyes. Really opened them. And looked at him. Not the king. Not the warrior. Not the man dying to protect her. But him. You were never supposed to die, she said. I was never supposed to love you, he whispered. Then why? Because your name became the only one I remembered when everything else was dust. She screamed again. His name. The dream core pulsed. The entire dream lattice folded inward, and then exploded outward. A sonic detonation. Cerynthia's final chain shattered. The northern dream field collapsed. But Cerynthia did not. For the first time, she stood in the core, light dripping from her shoulders, her hair solid again, her skin glowing with fire-etched scars of bond and sacrifice. She was herself. And she was awake. But before she could run to him, he dropped to his knees, breathing hard, bleeding from his chest, and smiling. Your voice, he murmured. You found it again. She reached for him. The lattice pulled her back. Her body wasn't whole enough. Not yet. He slumped forward. Not from pain. From peace. The system began to dim. Her light began to fade again. She cried out no. No, no, no. And in the last flicker of the collapsing dream, as the battlefield above crumbled and the sky above the ridge bled silver fire, she saw herself. In a bed. A real one. Not a dream. Not a song. Breathing. Alive. She sat up with a gasp. Eyes wide. Hands trembling. The core was gone. The dreamscape was silent. And she was alone. In the distance, something howled. But it wasn't him. And she whispered, voice cracking. He's gone, isn't he? Chapter 25. The bride he wouldn't let break. The crownless stair was made of broken vows. Every step bore the scratch of fingernails clawing for freedom, the echoes of howls swallowed before they could rise, the blood of kings who could not save the ones they loved. It was the highest place in the north. And tonight, it was a prison. Eryndor had sealed it with a king's mark. A ring of bowfire circled the topmost chamber of the Ashvale rampart, keeping her locked within a tower built on the backs of wolves who had chosen duty over desire. Cerynthia stood in the center of that silence, her hands trembling, her voice rising not in song, but in fury. You can't keep me here. The flames answered. They licked at the sigil lines, responding not to rebellion, but to grief. Because he had done it with love. That was the cruelest part. He had sealed her away not out of fear, but to save her. She pressed a palm to the barrier. The flames flared. Her voice rose, not in melody, but in a single word. Enough. The barrier cracked. Not from rage, but from recognition. Because even the fire remembered her. And Cerynthia walked free. The battlefield below was chaos. Cerynthea's army surged with renewed strength. The lock singers returned, twisted shadows of her, faces molded from stolen dreams, voices laced with surrender. The North's last warriors staggered as one. Eryndor stood alone at the rampart base, the crownless banner wrapped around his shoulders like the memory of an empire that had already died. When he saw her descend the stair, a streak of silver fire against the sky, his mouth opened. But no words came. Because she sang. Not a full song. Just a note. A raw, ragged cry that wasn't beautiful, but true. And every false echo shattered. The lock singers clutched at their throats. Their voices failed. Their bodies dissolved. And Cerynthia stepped from the burning horizon. Clad in robes of bone and voice, chains snaking behind him like serpents drunk on agony. He did not applaud. He only smiled. She breaks her leash, he said. Cerynthia raised her chin. I was never yours. He looked at Eryndor. And you? Still guarding her like a throne. Eryndor's blade remained at his side. She is my throne. Cerynthia tilted his head. But don't you see? Her very existence is the reason you're losing. You built a kingdom around a storm. I didn't build anything, Eryndor said softly. I just refused to let it fall. Cerynthia stepped forward. If you had let me go, she said, voice shaking, I would never have become a weapon. And if you do go now, Eryndor said, gripping her hand, this place truly becomes ash. She looked at him. Really looked. There was no space between them anymore. No battlefield. No vow unspoken. Only the unbearable truth. Their love had kept them alive. And now it might end the world. She touched his face. I could burn everything. He leaned into her touch. Then burn it. She kissed him. Not gently. Not sweetly. But like a match striking against the last dry surface of hope. When they pulled apart, the dream lattice above the Ashvale rampart cracked. The stars screamed. Cerynthia stepped back, shielded his eyes. You've made your choice then, he said. I always had, Eryndor murmured. But the wind was howling too loud for Cerynthia to hear. The howling wasn't wolves. It was her. And him. Together. A resonance forged not from harmony, but from obsession. Love too wild to tame. Too raw to cage. The kind that saved nothing, but refused to let go. That night, when Cerynthia finally slept again, her dream was cold. She saw Eryndor walking into the shattered dream core. Alone. Cloak torn. Back straight. Shoulders bare. The crownless king, eyes dim, lips silent. Carrying not hope, but promise. And she knew. knew what he'd chosen. Not peace. Not survival. Her. Always her. Even if she would never forgive him for it. Chapter 26. The Dream That Ate the Sky. The sky broke open with a scream. Not thunder. Not war. Something deeper. Something older. A howl too vast to have ever belonged to wolves, carved from the marrow of a forgotten god and hurled downward like a curse finally remembered. The sky-burned citadel trembled beneath it. Eryndor looked up and saw the end. It wasn't fire. It was hunger. Cerynthia final weapon had arrived. The Dream Eater. A beast forged from the torn remnants of broken soul bonds, shaped from silence, sealed in the bones of 100 betrayed kingdoms. Its body was a storm of jaws and inked void, its tendrils clawing at the dream lattice, unmaking every tower it touched. The chain gate shattered with its first breath. Spires folded like paper. Sigils screamed and burned out of existence. And it came straight for the core. Straight for him. Eryndor didn't flinch. He stepped forward alone. No crown. No army. Only the burn of a half-dead king mark in his palm and a voice in his bones that still remembered her. He activated the core gate manually, overriding all safeguards. "You're not meant to carry this alone," the dream code whispered. He overrode that too. The Dream Eater roared across the citadel sky. He turned his face upward and invited it in. The dream core howled as he descended into it, the last viable vault of Northvale's collective memory, now a collapsing tunnel of light and flame. Every dream echo of a fallen comrade flickered around him like ash caught in a wind that had forgotten how to carry the dead. They whispered as he passed. Ghosts of his army. Valak. The priestesses. His brothers. None of them tried to stop him. Because they knew. He was here to give them their last death. To protect the only part of the dream still alive. The beast tore through the sky above the citadel, crashing into the upper spires like a sun eating its own light. And still, he called it. Deeper. Into the lattice. Toward him. Until the core began to fracture. And just before the last seal broke, a scream answered his own. Her voice. Not song. Not harmony. A curse. Eryndor, no. He turned. And she was there. Not physically. Her body was still somewhere above, sealed and flickering. But her voice, her will, had torn open the link he tried to break. She appeared before him, glowing with the residual sigils of the bond they'd burned into one another's bones. And she lifted a trembling hand. Blood already trailing down her throat. No. He reached for her. But she had already made the choice. Her fingers found the dream artery in her neck. And she cut. The scream that followed did not belong to her. It belonged to the Dream Eater. Because her blood, her true blood, the cursed moonbound line she had always tried to suppress, was poison to Cerynthea's dreamwork. The sky above the citadel screamed with it. The beast twisted mid-descent, tore away from Eryndor, and lunged toward the brighter lore. Toward her. She didn't run, didn't blink, didn't sing, only whispered. Come then. The Dream Eater collided with her light and detonated. In the explosion that followed, the dream lattice ruptured across every remaining tower. The sky rained with sigil fragments. Time slowed. Memory unspooled like silk. Eryndor crawled across the burning edge of the vault. Found her. Collapsed. Still bleeding. But alive. Barely. Her eyes opened as he gathered her into his arms. You shouldn't have. She smiled. Shut up. And then softer. You're not my king. His chest cracked. She pressed a bloodied palm to his cheek. You're the one I chose to die for. He held her against him. And for one moment, just one, the world paused. No more gods. No more thrones. Just a man and a woman built of broken vows and borrowed time. And above them, Cerynthia descended from the remnants of the sundered sky. His chains dragged behind him like a wedding veil spun from agony. He looked down at the scorched battlefield where no song remained. And he spoke not to her, but to him. Your crown is cracked. Your soul exposed. Lay it down. Let the mark burn itself out. Eryndor didn't rise. Didn't flinch. Only pulled her tighter against his chest. And whispered, without looking away. She's already bled enough for me. In her dream that night, Cerynthia saw a single image. Eryndor, alone, walking into the silence of the dream core again. His shoulder draped in the final king mark. His eyes blind to everything but duty. And she whispered, "No," because she knew. This wasn't over. Not until she walked beside him. Not until they ended this together. Chapter 27, The Crown That Cried Her Name. The ashen moon bridge trembled as two gods made of memory and mourning collided. Above them, the sky had peeled back, revealing not stars, but fracture lines of the dream lattice, sigil bloodlines etched across a dying world. Below them, the Heartspire vault pulsed like a failing heart, the last tether of Northvale's dream ore bound together by one final voice, barely clinging to breath. Cerynthia could not cross the bridge. Her body remained locked behind the sealed edge of the tower, too weak to breach the collapse, too dream-shattered to step into the chainstorm that had become Cerynthea's final domain. But she watched. And worse, listened. Eryndor stood on the bridge, chest bared to the wind, dream blood leaking from his palms like ink torn from a sacred book. His king mark had spread across his back and shoulders, cracked and burning, no longer a symbol of reign but of ruin. Of choice. Cerynthia rose opposite him, crownless, robed in tethered echoes and stolen lullabies. His voice came not from his mouth but from the lattice itself, 1,000 stolen versions of Cerynthia's own songs twisted into chains. "You were never a king," Cerynthia said. "Just a boy who refused to bow." "I knelt once," Eryndor replied, stepping forward. "To who?" He looked up, eyes blazing. "To her." And then they fought. Not with blades, but with memory. Cerynthia hurled dreamstorms laced with betrayal, images of every soldier Eryndor had failed, every brother buried, every oath broken to protect a single girl with too much fire in her voice. Eryndor staggered beneath the weight of it. He bled. Fell to one knee. The bridge cracked. In the dream lattice chamber, Cerynthia screamed. "Don't you dare." He heard her. But her voice was fading. He pressed his palm to the stone. And Cerynthia descended upon him like the final silence. "You lost the moment you chose her over the world," Cerynthia hissed. But then, a sound. So soft it should have been missed. A melody. Unfinished. It was her. Cerynthia's voice, just a hum. The first song she had ever tried to write. The one she never finished. Because he'd interrupted her once to ask her name. Because he couldn't stop listening long enough for her to sing. Now she gave it back. The melody that had no ending. That was only ever meant for him. Eryndor looked up. His mouth curled into something not quite a smile. And then he stood. "Let me teach you what it means to choose someone." He slammed his palm into the dream core behind him. His king mark flared. The lattice screamed. His blood became sigil. His bones became song. His voice, low, rough, aching, broke through every chain Cerynthia had ever forged. "I give you my name." The mark on his chest ignited. "My vow." The bridge shattered. Cerynthia lunged. And Eryndor whispered, "My crown." The world exploded. Cerynthia slammed into the tower floor as the lattice detonated. The dream sky fractured above her. The moon bridge burned out of existence. The vault screamed. She sat up, breathless, and felt it. Felt him. The silence that wasn't absence, but sacrifice. He had won. And left her behind. "No." She stood on shaking legs. "No, you don't get to end it like that." Her fingers trembled as she reached for the lattice cord. And somewhere in the whispering remnants of the system, a phrase echoed back. "I remember her. So I need her to forget me." Her knees buckled. She choked. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Because in the echoed chamber of the Heartspire, one message was still being written. His voice, embedded in the last dream mark. A command. A farewell. Just for her. Tomorrow night, don't come. And she knew. The king had written his death into the end of their song. Chapter 28. The night he taught her to howl. The snow fell slowly that night. It blanketed the Tower of Last Dreaming like a secret, covering the cracks in the stone, the bloodstains at the stairs, the old forgotten echoes that still clung to the lintels like the breath of ghosts who'd stayed too long. On the Frostvale balcony, where the wind howled like a morning choir, two figures sat side by side. Eryndor's cloak wrapped around Cerynthia's shoulders. His body was close enough to warm her, but not close enough to tether her. His hand rested just beside hers on the ledge, almost touching, almost. They didn't speak of the war. They didn't speak of Cerynthia, of thrones, of the broken chains still smoldering beneath the ice-veiled horizon. They just watched the snowfall. "You remember the first time you sang for me?" he asked, voice low and raw. She nodded slowly. "It wasn't really singing," she said. "It was barely a hum. I knew then." "Knew what?" He turned his head. The soft light of the snow reflected in his eyes. "That I was going to ruin everything to hear it again." She smiled, though her chest felt tight. "You did. I did." The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. It was full of everything they had not said, of everything they had lost, and everything they still hadn't let go. "You're being too gentle," she said suddenly. Eryndor tilted his head. "Am I?" "You're not arguing. You're not planning. You're not fighting." Her voice cracked. "You're just sitting here. As if this is the end." He didn't respond. "Is it?" she asked. "The end?" He looked down at his hands. Snow had begun to gather between his fingers. "When I was a child," he said softly, "my father told me wolves die alone. That even if we were crowned, if we led packs or ruled bones, we were born to howl at the moon knowing it would never howl back." She turned toward him sharply. "Don't you dare talk like that." He smiled faintly. "You changed that for me." "I'm not the moon," she whispered. "No," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "You're the voice that taught me how to answer it." Her throat closed. "Then don't go." He reached up slowly, gently, brushing a stray silver strand from her cheek. "If I don't go," he said, "the world won't forget me." "I don't want the world to forget you." He leaned closer. "I do." Tears slipped down her face. She didn't know when it had started snowing harder, when the sky had turned from pale lavender to gray, when her breath had begun to catch on every inhale. "You're not coming back from this, are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood. Pulled from around his shoulders the royal mantle, the one she had seen soaked in blood more times than she could count, and draped it carefully over her lap. Then his hand went to his chest. He withdrew the dream stone. The one that contained every recorded memory, every resonance signature of the kings before him. He placed it in her palm. Then unfastened the clasp at his throat. The mark of the king. His sigil. His name. He placed that last. "Eryndor," she whispered. "Stop. I'm giving you back everything I never should have held. Please." He knelt before her. Not in defeat, but in devotion. "You once asked to die with me." She grabbed his hands. "Yes, I still would. Let me." He shook his head, gently but firmly. "No, you don't deserve to die for me. You think I'll survive this?" His voice broke. "I need you to." "Why?" "Because I want someone to remember that we lived. Even for a moment." Her hands trembled in his. She shook her head, over and over. "Let me follow." He kissed her knuckles. "You'll never need to." That night she dreamed. Of snow. Of fire. Of him. But he was running. Always just ahead. She chased. Through halls of memory, through fractured towers, through moonlight and bloodlight. She screamed his name. And he turned. Just once. Long enough to say, "I love you more than I love the crown." She reached for him. But her hand passed through him like wind through mist. And she woke up screaming. Her bed was cold. The sigils around her flickered. The tower had grown too quiet. She reached for the dream link. Found it severed. He had cut her out. Sealed the tether. She could no longer reach him. Could no longer sing to him. She stumbled to the balcony. The snow was falling harder now. The sky had turned silver. And from somewhere deep within the ruined heart of Norvale, the bone clock struck once. It was not a toll of time. It was the toll of tradition. Of ancient ritual. Of one thing only. A king's last breath. A self-chosen death. She fell to her knees in the snow, arms shaking, teeth clenched. And for the first time in her life, she howled. Not beautifully. Not for the court. Not for the dream lattice. She howled like something feral. Like something broken. Like someone who had just realized she was alive and that the one who taught her how to live was gone. Chapter 29. The King Who Tore Out His Own Heart. The Tower of Last Dreaming stood hollow beneath a sky that had forgotten what color was. Ash fell like snow. Not from flame, but from memory, bone-deep, echo-born memory, pulverized and scattered across the north like the remains of a name spoken too many times in mourning. At the base of the tower, no guards waited. No wolves patrolled. No banners stirred. Only one man ascended. Alone. Eryndor Ravemarch, crownless and blood-marked, climbed the spiral carved by his ancestors into the marrow of the dream lattice. He carried no weapon. No torch. No map. Just the king mark glowing at the center of his chest, pulsing like a dying star, bright enough to blind and fragile enough to break. When he reached the bone or nexus, the walls of the world whispered. 7 voices. The 7 kings before him. Not as spirits, not as men, but as traces. We ended in silence. We ended in snow. We ended in shame. But he had no words for them. Only breath. And purpose. At the heart of the bone ore was the woven throne, not carved from stone, but from the condensed agony of every ruler who had failed to save their beloved. He approached it, hands bloodied, mark blazing. The throne pulsed in response. Waiting. Confirm ritual. King's 7-fold shatter. He knelt and pressed his hand to the base plate. Eryndor Ravemarch, he said, voice raw. Last of the name. First of the fallen. Sequence accepted. The lattice shuddered. Far above, in every dreambound soldier across the north, a thread snapped. The south felt it too. Cerynthia felt it most. In his locked chamber deep beneath the ruins of the chain spire, the Chain King stumbled, blood pouring from his nose, eyes rolling white. No, he whispered. He wouldn't, he shouldn't. But the dream had already opened, and Eryndor was inside it. Cerynthia appeared before him, masked in silver-black armor, chains hissing around his limbs, dream blood dripping from his lips. Do you know what you're doing? He asked, voice a whip. You're unmaking your own soul. You'll never return. Eryndor stood within the core of the nexus. The walls of the dream pulsed around him, stitched with the screams of uncountable histories. I'm not trying to return, he said simply. Cerynthia sneered. Then you'll die forgotten. Not if she remembers me. The Chain King's eyes narrowed. She, he echoed. She's gone. Broken. Caged in ash and false hope. Do you want to see her one more time? And then she appeared. A figure bathed in silver. Hair like dream thread. Eyes wide. Frightened. Mouth trembling. Cerynthia. Her voice came soft. Please, don't do this. Stay. For me. Eryndor did not move. He didn't blink. Nice trick, he said coldly. But she never begged. The illusion shattered like glass. Cerynthia screamed in fury. And Eryndor sat on the woven throne. The lattice screamed. The ritual began. Phase 1. Soul unbinding. The mark on his chest split. His ribs flared with heat, silver lines tearing across his skin. Phase 2. Memory erosion. His mind cracked open. Vision spilled, his mother's voice, Valak's last laugh, Cerynthia's first hum. He bit his tongue and kept going. Phase 3. Core Reversal. The throne under him crumbled. Dreamlight flooded his mouth, nose, eyes. He convulsed, but held steady. Phase 4. Self-Singularity Collapse. His spine snapped inward. His blood flowed upward into the dream spires, into every thread of the lattice. And then he saw her. Not the illusion. Her. Cerynthia stood at the dream's edge, glowing and real. Eyes wide. Mouth open. "Eryndor," she whispered. And this time, her voice was hers. "If I asked you to live, would you stay?" He looked at her. For the last time. His smile was soft. Like snowfall in spring. "No," he said gently. "But I'll take you with me." "How?" He closed his eyes. And whispered. "By remembering the first line you ever sang." And then he broke. His body shattered from the heart outward. 7 cracks across his chest. 7 howls through the lattice. His blood became fire. His name became a roar. And Cerynthia, thousands of miles away, was torn from the dream entirely, his chains unraveling, his soldiers' minds exploding from within. The South fell. The war ended. But so did the king. In the silence that followed, the tower of last dreaming collapsed. And every man, woman, and child in Norvale looked skyward, as the bone clock tolled once. And in every mind, the same voice whispered, "Don't forget her. She taught me how to love." That night, no snow fell. Only silver ash. And no one wept. Because the king had already done it for them. Chapter 30. The Bride Who Sang Herself to Death. Ash fell in silence. It coated the ruins of Ashvale Tower in pale silver, as if the sky had wept bone dust instead of snow. Every stone left standing was scorched by song. The Frostvale Echo Crater gaped where the tower's heart had once been, and below it, deep beneath the twisted stair and shattered sigils, lay the throne pit. No banners fluttered. No wolves howled. No breath stirred. Except hers. Cerynthia Howent stood barefoot at the edge of the ruin. Her gown had torn in the collapse, clinging to her with threads of soot and dried blood. Her eyes were open, but unseeing. Not because she was blind, but because she had seen too much. The dream lattice was gone. The voice chains severed. Eryndor's final ritual had sealed the entire upper lattice from consciousness. Yet she refused that silence. He had told her not to follow. So she bled her way into the ruins. She clawed her palm open and pressed it to the remnants of the dream sigil burned into the ground, forcing her own blood into the resonance. "Open," she whispered. "I know there's still a way. I know you left something behind." Nothing answered. So she screamed. But her voice had no melody anymore. It cracked with rawness, the remains of a voice once called silver. She fell to her knees. Her fingers scraped at the stone until her nails tore. The memory of his howl still echoed in her bones. And then, a flicker. The echo core. Not real. Not stable. But there. The flicker burned her pupils as it stabilized into a loop. Only one scene, nothing more. Over and over. His final act. Eryndor sitting on the throne. Smiling. Breaking. Shattering from the heart outward. His blood lighting the lattice. His name becoming ash. Over. And over. And over. She watched it 37 times. On the 38th, she screamed. "Stop showing me how he died." The dream didn't answer. So she staggered to her feet. Walked down into the pit. And found the stone where his body had melted into sigil. It was warm. She fell against it. And cried. "I know you hear me." No answer. But she felt the hum. Faint. So faint. Still tethered, somehow, to the first time she ever sang in his presence. The first line of a song neither of them had finished. Not in dream. Not in waking. Not in war. She pressed her ruined palm to her throat. Then to the stone. And began to sing. Not in melody. But in will. The first note tore her vocal cords. Blood spilled down her chin. The second caught in the ruined threads of the dream net, sparking sparks of lattice shiver. The third opened to shimmer above the pit, visible only for a moment, like a window through death. And she smiled, because she knew he was listening. So she sang harder, each word unraveling her lungs, each phrase searing her skin. Her legs gave out. She slid to her knees. Her breath came in shudders. The air around her thickened with ash. But she kept singing, because this was the song they never finished. The song that was supposed to start with life, not end with loss. She reached the last verse, the one she had never dared write, and her voice broke into blood. She gasped, collapsed backward. Her body burned from within. The remnants of the dream lattice scorched her skin as they tried to process her resonance. She lay there, spine arched, eyes staring into a sky that didn't remember the sun. And with her last breath, she whispered, "I know you hear me. You answered me once. In a dream." She smiled, just a little, blood curling at the corner of her mouth. And then, she stopped. Her fingers slid away from the dream thread. Her lungs stilled. Her song ended. The silence afterward was endless. Until one thread of the dream lattice, deep beneath the pit, pulsed. It pulled her body downward, folded it into the stone. The king's mark awakened once more. It merged with her spine, her hands, her broken throat, and sealed. Her remains bound with his. A voice and a howl. A crown and a vow. Together. Not in life, but in echo. In the years that followed, no king rose in North Vale. But the kingdom held, because every dreamborn soldier who entered the lattice for the first time heard her voice, that unfinished song. And then a whisper would follow, low and ancient and carved from the sound of snow meeting blood. "You are not her, but you are worthy of being remembered." And no one ever dreamed alone again. Because in the deepest part of the frost-bound dream, she sang still, and he held with her. Forever. She died, but she left the living mark where every howl first began.